There is a brief moment in the World of Warcraft episode where Cartman sits in front of his computer, surrounded by empty cans and old wrappers, his hair greasy, his eyes glazed, looking less like a child and more like something the internet has slowly built out of a boy. The camera holds on that image for just long enough that you understand the show is not joking about this part. South Park has spent almost 3 decades watching the internet change us, the way it eats our time, our manners, our friendships, our politics, our self-image, our nights, and very few other shows have documented it this closely. Tonight we are going through all of it, the episodes, the patterns, the arguments, the wins, the misses, the moments the show was years ahead, and the moments where it was a little behind. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while, and if you haven't subscribed to Paper Town yet, it really does help us keep making these. This is Paper Town. Settle in. To understand what South Park has been doing with the internet, it helps to remember when the show actually started, because the show started before the internet looked anything like the thing we now think of as the internet. The first proper episode aired in August of 1997, which sounds modern enough on paper, but back then, the average American home that even had a connection got online through a phone line with that long, bright dial-up tone that sounded like a small machine slowly waking up. Email was something most people had at work and not at home. The web was a few corners of strange personal pages, message boards and plain text, gaming forums, fan sites for shows, and a handful of news sites that took a minute to load. There was no Google as we know it, no Wikipedia, no YouTube, no Facebook, no Twitter, no Reddit, no Instagram, no TikTok, no broadband, no streaming as a daily habit, no algorithm in the modern sense. The thing we currently call the internet, the thing that lives in your pocket and tells you what to want, simply did not exist yet in the form we now take for granted. And the strange wrinkle, the part that is almost forgotten now, is that South Park itself was already an internet phenomenon before the show was ever on television. In the mid-90s, Matt Stone and Trey Parker made a short film called The Spirit of Christmas, the version sometimes called Jesus vs. Santa, commissioned by a network executive who wanted to send it around as a kind of video card to industry friends. Someone with access to one of those then rare home internet connections passed it on. Then someone else passed it on. People started copying the file to other computers, mailing it to friends, swapping it on burned discs and at parties. In an era where moving a small video file took hours, it still spread. By the time Comedy Central got involved and put the show on the air, a quiet and growing audience of early internet users had already seen 4 foul-mouthed children kick Jesus around a snow-covered street, and the show arrived with a kind of mythological status because of how it had traveled. South Park did not start as a TV show that became a viral video. It started as a viral video that became a TV show. So when we ask what South Park thinks about the internet, we should remember that the internet, in a sense, is part of how the show was born. For the first few seasons, however, the show is too busy being South Park to be about the internet. The early run, those first 3 or 4 years, is mostly small-town satire. The boys are at school, the adults are foolish, the news comes through a tiny local television in the background, and most of what happens to the town happens because of who lives there or who has just driven into Park County. The technology in the corner of the frame is comically dated by today's standards. Big beige boxes with tiny gray screens, cordless landline phones, fax machines at the police station, that single low FI monitor at the school's computer lab. Even Cartman, who in later seasons will become the show's chief internet villain, mostly does his villainy in person. He humiliates people at the bus stop, he runs scams on the playground, he writes hateful letters in pencil. When he wants to ruin someone, he gets out of his chair and goes and ruins them in their face. The internet is barely in the room. You can, however, catch the show starting to notice. In the show's 4th season in the year 2000, there is an episode where Cartman, looking for what he calls a sophisticated older friend, ends up in an internet chat room. He thinks he is talking to other lonely children, and he is in fact talking to a string of adult men with bad intentions, which sets off a chain of events that ends in a chaotic sting operation. As a piece of television comedy, it is darker than it is funny, and you can feel the show feeling its way around something it does not yet know how to satirize. The simple act of putting a child in front of a glowing screen, alone in his room, talking to strangers in disguise, is treated as quietly horrifying. The show does not yet have a fully formed argument about the internet, but it has a feeling, and the feeling is that this new room into which anyone can walk wearing any face is going to be a problem. In the next few seasons, you see other small acknowledgements. Characters use webcams, characters get scammed on shady-looking websites, characters discover that the news they trust is being shaped by people they cannot see. There is an episode that mocks ratings, driven cable news that doubles as a quiet warning about audience metrics. There are jokes about pop-up windows and download speeds, throwaway gags about people pretending to be someone else online. None of it really lands as the show's signature internet commentary yet, because the internet has not yet hardened into the thing that swallows daily life. Broadband is just starting to roll out. YouTube does not arrive until early in 2005. Facebook is, at first, only for students. Twitter is barely an idea. The show is sketching on a surface that is still being painted. And then, in October of 2006, almost a decade into the show's run, South Park looks directly at the internet and produces what is probably its most famous episode ever made about a screen, the Make Love Not Warcraft episode. The moment in retrospect where South Park decides that the internet is now part of the human condition and worth a full half hour of close attention, and probably worth several more after that. From here on, the show will keep coming back to this fight again and again, sometimes more sharply, sometimes more softly, sometimes hilariously, sometimes ruefully, but always with the same underlying instinct. Something is happening to us, and very few other shows seem willing to follow it all the way down. So before we go on, hold that image of South Park as a show that was born on the early internet and that spent its first decade quietly watching the thing that birthed it grow into something far stranger. Because from here, the story is one of the show chasing that thing across season after season, refusing to let it out of frame. If you grew up watching South Park, you probably have certain episodes that have lived in your head longer than they should have, and Make Love Not Warcraft is almost always on that list. It is the episode about World of Warcraft, the gigantic online role-playing game that, in the mid-2000s, became the first time a large part of the planet collectively lived inside a fictional world together. The game was already enormous by the time the episode aired in October of 2006. Millions of players had logged in, built characters, joined guilds, fought monsters, and arranged their lives around raid schedules. South Park, which had spent its previous decade making fun of cable news and celebrity culture in small-town America, suddenly decided to make a half hour of television about people sitting still in a chair. The plot is simple, almost stripped down. The boys are playing the game. They notice that someone is going around killing low-level players for no reason, again and again, ruining the experience for everyone. They learn that he is too high level to defeat through normal play, so they decide to grind. They sit at their computers, eat junk food, ignore school, ignore their families, ignore sunlight, and slowly turn themselves into characters powerful enough to challenge him. Eventually, with the help of a special weapon stored on a hard drive at the offices of the game's actual developer, they meet him on the field and bring him down. Then they go back to playing the game. The boys cheer, the credits roll. What makes the episode work, what makes people still talk about it almost 2 decades later, is how seriously it takes the inside of the screen and how honestly it draws the outside of the screen. The in-game footage was rendered using the actual World of Warcraft engine. Blizzard, the company behind the game, helped the show set up servers and capture sequences so that the look of the play matched the look of the real game. When the boys are inside the game, they look like the characters players already had on their own machines. The voices keep going underneath, and the lag of typing into chat boxes is captured perfectly. For viewers who had never played, it offered a clean and accurate window into what their friends or partners or siblings were actually doing for hours every night. For viewers who had played, it felt like seeing your hobby drawn lovingly and accurately on a major television show for the first time. But the outside of the screen is where the episode does its real work. The boys, over the course of the grinding montage, slowly fall apart physically. They put on weight, their skin breaks out, their hair greases over, their eyes go dim, they stop washing. The world around them becomes the chair, the keyboard, the monitor, the half-eaten plate of food, and the bin overflowing with empty soda cans. Their parents try to interrupt and are waved off. They are not having fun in any visible way. The faces of the boys, even when they win small in-game victories, are the slack, dead faces of people performing a long job. The episode argues, without ever stopping to say so, that the line between play and work has blurred. They are leveling up, they are unlocking achievements, they are climbing a ladder. They are doing all of this in service of nothing that exists outside of the server, and the cost is being paid in the only currency they actually have, which is their bodies and their hours. That image, the small, soft body of a child slowly being reshaped by hundreds of hours of sitting, is the one that people remember. It is also probably one of the most prescient images in the entire run of the show because it predicts something that would only get worse in the years that followed. Game design got smarter, loops got tighter, mobile games arrived with their endless little rewards. Social media platforms borrowed the mechanics. The infinite scroll became a kind of one-player grind that anyone can play, all day without ever finishing. South Park in 2006 was drawing the early shape of what would become the attention economy. And yet the episode is also surprisingly affectionate. It does not treat the players as freaks. The fellow gamers who help the boys are a little strange, but they are not stupid, and the time spent inside the world is not portrayed as pure waste. There is friendship in there is solving and planning and teamwork. The villain, too, is treated with a kind of dark sympathy. The show implies, without ever saying so, that he is doing what he is doing because he can, because the game gives him a way to be powerful in a place where the rules will not punish him the way the rules outside the screen would. He has found a corner of the internet where being cruel has no real cost. That is something the show will come back to many times in the years that follow, and you can already see the early outline of it here. There is a real-world story to add to this episode too, because the production process became part of internet history in its own right. The makers of the show approached Blizzard and worked closely with them to capture the in-game footage. The collaboration was, by all accounts, friendly and creative. The episode also became, in the months after it aired, one of the most pirated, downloaded, and replayed episodes of the entire series. It went up on early video sharing platforms, it got passed around offices. It became, ironically, a kind of viral content about the dangers of online overconsumption. The very phenomenon the episode was watching helped carry the episode itself into every corner of the network. When it came time for award season the next year, Make Love Not Warcraft won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program. That is a real award given to a real episode of a half-hour cartoon in which children spend most of their screen time motionless in chairs. The fact that voters from the wider industry gave it a top prize tells you something. They understood that the show had done something rare. It had taken what looked like a niche subculture and shown that it was actually a snapshot of where a much larger part of the culture was already heading. The Grinding Boys were not just gamers, they were the early outline of all of us. One way to read this episode, which the show only nudges at and never spells out, is that the supposed villain is the only character who actually understands what the game is. He treats it as a place. He lives there. He acts there the way some people act in cars when they think no one can see them. The boys learn to beat him by becoming, briefly, as committed to the place as he is. And in the final frames, when their fingers are sore and their backs hurt and the in-game enemies have stopped respawning, they let out the small, flat sound of people who have just spent a fortune on something that ended too quickly. They go back to playing because they do not yet know what else to do. The chairs in those last shots look heavier than the children. If you only ever watched one piece of South Park to understand what the show thinks about the internet, this is probably it. Everything that comes after, the trolling arcs, the algorithm arcs, the phone in the hand episodes, the streaming wars, the AI specials, can be traced back to the basic thesis of Make Love Not Warcraft. Something on the screen is asking for your time. The asking is patient and clever and beautifully animated. The cost is your hours, your health, your attention, and your relationships outside the room. And the show, even when it laughs at the people paying that cost, is never cruel about it. It is mournful. It looks at the boys in their chairs, and it does not tell them to log off. It just keeps watching, and it asks you to watch with it. A year and a half after the World of Warcraft episode, in the spring of 2008, the show came back to the internet with a different kind of question. This one was not really about play. It was about money. Canada on Strike is one of the strangest episodes of the entire run, and one of the most quietly accurate, because it tries to explain something that almost nobody at the time had a clean explanation for, which is how all the new viral videos that everyone was watching were actually paying anyone. In the episode, the country of Canada goes on strike to demand a share of what its prime minister calls internet money. The implication being that everyone keeps talking about the value of online content, and yet the people who make the most popular online content do not seem to be getting any of it. To resolve the strike, the boys are asked to negotiate. To do that, they go looking for the most famous viral video stars on the internet, who turn out to be sitting together in a small white room, gathered around a table, waiting for their checks. The room is one of the great visual jokes of the show. Sitting at that table are caricatures of nearly every viral video sensation of the moment. There is the man who likes to dance. There is the man who screams about a wild animal. There is the chocolate dripping star of an early commercial. There is the keyboard playing cat. There is the laughing baby. There is the man who keeps yelling about Britney. They are bickering. They are arguing about who is more famous. They are arguing about how the lineup should be ordered. They are arguing as if they are old-fashioned union members in a back room. And what they are arguing about, fundamentally, is when the checks are going to arrive. The boys turn up and learn that the checks are not going to arrive at all because nobody is paying any of these people. They have made millions of people laugh. They have traveled around the world inside billions of phones. And what they have to show for it is a fistful of what the show calls theoretical dollars. Internet money, numbers that do not turn into anything. That gag has aged into something close to prophecy. The era in which the episode aired was the very early moment of monetized online video. The big platforms had only recently figured out how to put advertisements on top of user-uploaded clips. The split between platform and creator was still being negotiated, often in ways that favored the platform. The phrase content creator did not really exist yet as a job description. Most of the people whose faces were already burned into the global brain at that moment were not yet being paid in any meaningful sense, and many of them never would be because the platforms that hosted them simply did not have the architecture to pay them. The show, in 2008, looks at that fact and turns it into a small union meeting in a white room. The argument the episode is making, gently but firmly, is that the new economy of attention has invented a form of labor that does not yet have a name and certainly does not have a wage. There are people doing something for which they should be paid, and the thing they are doing is being watched. The checks are theoretical because the system has not yet decided whether the watching is a kind of work. There is more to Canada on strike than the union meeting, though, and the show only nods at it. The episode is set against an actual writer's strike that had been taking place in the real world while the episode was being made, when Hollywood writers walked off the job in the winter of 2007 into 2008. The show was, of course, also affected by that strike and was navigating its own production constraints. By turning the strike into a Canadian comedy, the show gets to satirize both sides at once. It mocks the impulse of striking workers to make impossible demands. It mocks the corporate impulse to insist there is nothing to share. And it lands, almost without trying, on the much bigger point about the new platforms. The strike collapses not because of any moral victory. It collapses because nobody really knows where the money is or how to put it back. The show implies that this is the actual situation. The viral video stars are not lying when they say they earned the money. The companies are not lying when they say they cannot find it. The thing they are all standing around is an economy that has not yet been built. It is worth pausing on how strange this episode looked at the time. Most television comedy in 2008 did not know what to do with viral videos. They were treated as novelties. The morning news shows would play them at the end of the broadcast as a kind of warm down. South Park took them, dragged them into the center of an episode, and treated them as a labor issue. It is one of the first times a major American show treats internet culture not as a quirk, but as a system, with its own rules, its own winners, and its own losers. And the way the show frames the losers, the small parade of recognizable faces sitting around the table waiting for checks that will not come, has an undertow of pity. The show is not laughing at them for being silly. The show is laughing at the rest of us for thinking we had given them something just by watching. In the closing moments of the episode, the boys go to the source of all internet money, which is rendered as a giant glowing internet, a literal cartoon visualization of the network humming along, and they find that the checks really are not real. The screen ends on a kind of shrug. There is nothing here, the show says. There never was. And yet you keep clicking. The strike is over. The Canadian government goes home. The viral stars go back to making the things that made them famous. and nothing about their situation has changed. They are still doing labor. They are still not being paid. They are still being watched. The economy continues to behave as if all of this were resolved, which of course is exactly how it has continued to behave in the long years since. If you watch that episode now, you can see how clearly it sketched something that took the wider culture another decade to admit out loud. There's a class of online worker whose hours and creativity and physical presence underpin the new platforms, and the question of how that work gets compensated has not been settled. Sometimes it is settled badly, sometimes it is settled in tiny fractions. Sometimes it is settled with merchandise or fan support and not with a wage. Sometimes the work just stops being possible because the rules of the platform change overnight. The show, in 2008, did not need that vocabulary to draw the picture. It just sat the workers around a small white table, gave them each a check made out of paper that turned out to mean nothing, and let them argue about who got to sit at the head. If Canada on Strike was the show asking what the internet was worth, Overlogging is the show asking what would happen if it went away. The episode aired about 2 weeks after Canada on Strike, in the same season, 12 run. It opens with the Marsh family in their kitchen doing what families in 2008 had recently begun to do, which is checking their phones and computers all the time, even when they are not really doing anything in particular. Then the connection in the house drops, and so does the connection in the neighbor's house, and so does the connection in the office, and so does the connection in every house in South Park. There is no obvious cause. The towers and routers and cables all seem to be working. The internet, the show says, has simply left, like weather, like a herd of animals that decided to move on. What happens next is one of the show's tightest pieces of allegory. The family, panicked, begins to behave the way Americans behave during real historical droughts. They pack the car. They tie things to the roof. They head west because rumor has it that out west, in California, there's still a small pocket of working internet, the way there used to be water and grass for cattle and crops. They are filmed against landscapes that look like the Dust Bowl. The show is openly modeling the migration on The Grapes of Wrath, the John Steinbeck novel about families displaced by the Great Drought of the 1930s. The episode treats the loss of internet access as a kind of environmental collapse. Suddenly, the conversation in the car is about whether there will be a connection at the next stop. The conversation at the petrol station is about whether they have wireless. The conversation in the line at the camp when they reach the so-called internet refugee camp out west is about how much time they will be allowed in front of the only working router. That camp is the long center of the episode. People line up to use a single connection. They are given a tiny window of access, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, less. They tell themselves they need the time for important things, for work, for messages to family, for news. The show then quietly shows what they actually do with their 3 minutes, and almost without exception, they use it for nothing. They would, in their right minds, call important. They check the same things they would have checked at home. They scroll, they look at the same little notifications they have been looking at for years. And when the time runs out, they walk away looking starved. They line up again. They wait for hours to get another 2 minutes of nothing in particular. The show is doing something both very funny and very tender here. It is not mocking the people in the line. It is showing how the simple presence of the connection, even if it carries nothing of substance, has become a kind of nutrient. They do not even know what they are taking from the screen anymore. They just know that they want to be in front of it. While this is happening, the federal government in the episode tries to figure out where the internet went. There is a long parody sequence in which scientists treat the internet as if it were a living animal that has fled, and they bring in old men who used to work with it back in the early days, who speak in slow accents about how the internet was once a different beast, before broadband, before video, before everyone got online. They get to a giant warehouse in which the entire internet in the episode's universe is rendered as a single physical thing, a great glowing router lying on its side, surrounded by mist, breathing. It is a beautifully strange image, the internet, drawn in 3 dimensions, looking like a captured god. The scientists realize that the internet is sick. They cannot find the cause. They confer for hours. Eventually, in a moment of childish brilliance, the boys walk over, see the standard household router on the floor, get behind it and unplug it and plug it back in. The lights come on. The internet returns. The world goes back to scrolling. That gag, the entire crisis solved by switching it off and on again, is one of the most famous in the entire run of the show. It works as a joke because it is true. It also works as commentary because it is humiliating. The full apocalyptic migration, the displacement of families, the rationing, the cult like waiting in lines, all of it was triggered by something so small and so silly that any IT help desk worker could have fixed it without thinking. The show is laughing at the people in the lines, but it is laughing at all of us because it has correctly noticed that we already cannot tell the difference between a real disaster and the absence of a small humming box in the corner of our living rooms. We have collapsed the importance of those two things into one. The internet has become, by 2008, indistinguishable in our hearts from things like running water and electricity, even though we are not yet sure what we are using it for. And the episode has one more move, which is also tender. When the connection returns, you might expect a scene in which the boys decide to keep their distance, having learned a lesson about over-reliance. The show does not give you that scene. Instead, the family pulls out their phones and laptops and immediately begins scrolling again, and the episode ends without any change in their behavior at all. They were not in the camp because they wanted to be there. They were in the camp because they had to be. Now that the connection is back, they will do exactly what they did before. They will live with their faces in the screen, and they will scroll quietly through the evening as if the desert and the lines and the displacement had never happened. The show is saying that the lesson is real, but no one will learn it. The crisis will not change the behavior. Of course not. It is not in the show's nature to pretend that people change easily. Overlogging predates almost every modern conversation about screen addiction, dopamine loops, attention engineering, and the smartphone era. It airs in 2008. The iPhone has been on the market for less than a year. The image of the entire family checking their phones at the breakfast table is not yet a cliché of every think piece. The show looks at the very early outline of a habit that almost no one is yet calling a habit, and it asks, what would the absence of this look like? It says, you would migrate, you would line up, you would wait, you would mourn, you would weep over a connection that may carry nothing. And then, when it returns, you would forget. You would not be grateful. You would not change. You would just open the screen again and keep doing what you were doing. There are very few half hours of television, before or since, that get the situation that clearly, that early. And then it ends, like most South Park episodes about the internet, without any visible lesson learned. Which is, of course, the point. For the next few years, the show keeps drifting back to the screen in small ways, but the next great big internet episode is the one called HUMANCENTiPAD, which opens season 15 in the spring of 2011. The premise is set up in the first scene. Kyle, like most people in the world by 2011, has agreed to the terms and conditions on his various devices without reading them. He has clicked the button, he has accepted the agreement, he has signed the contract. This is what everyone does, every day, multiple times a day. We have all agreed to thousands of pages of legal language that we have never opened and will never open. Most of us have a vague feeling that this is fine because nothing seems to come of it. The episode imagines a world in which something comes of it. What comes of it, in this case, is that a giant fictionalized version of a famous Cupertino-based technology company shows up to collect on the agreement. They have not, the show explains, been doing anything illegal. They had a clause about participation in product development. Kyle ticked the box. Now they are entitled to use his body. He is taken to a basement, sedated, woken up in restraints, and forced to participate in a horrifying biological device that is the company's next consumer release. The name of the device is the joke of the episode, a portmanteau that combines the name of a real popular tablet computer with the name of a real, disturbing horror film about people connected mouth to colon in a row. It is the most viscerally upsetting concept the show had attempted in years, and it works because the satire is precise. Nothing about the situation is legally untrue inside the rules of the show's world. Kyle did, in fact, sign the agreement. He did, in fact, click yes. The episode is showing us, in a deliberately extreme way, what could in principle be agreed to inside the wall of language we have all consented to without reading. The other half of the plot involves Cartman trying to buy the same fictional tablet device. He throws a tantrum because his mother will not buy it for him. His tantrum extends out of the house and into the wider world. He goes to a store. He tries to push other customers into agreeing on his behalf. He makes himself, over the course of the episode, into a portrait of the modern consumer who behaves as if not having the latest product is a kind of human rights violation. The episode juxtaposes him with Kyle, who is being treated as a piece of hardware, and it lets you feel the gap between the two. One child has been folded into a machine. The other child wants nothing more than to own a machine. The show is asking us, without ever saying so out loud, whether those two experiences are really as different as we like to think. What makes HUMANCENTiPAD memorable is that the episode treats the technology company itself with a strange kind of neutrality. They are not portrayed as cackling villains with sinister music when they enter the room. They are portrayed as people who simply followed the legal documents to their literal conclusion. They are slightly weary, slightly bored, slightly impatient with Kyle when he claims he did not understand what he signed up for. They keep referring back to the agreement. Their tone throughout the episode is the calm and reasonable tone of customer service. The show is doing a careful thing here. It is refusing to make the company a monster. By giving them the tone of a polite call center, the episode argues that the system that has produced this nightmare is not a conspiracy. It is just a contract read out loud by a tired person with a clipboard who has heard everyone's complaint before. That detail is what makes the episode age so strangely well. In the years that followed, the gap between what users have actually agreed to and what they think they have agreed to has only grown. Every new connected device, every new home assistant, every new wearable, every new social network comes with another stack of language that almost nobody reads. There are now legal scholars whose entire job is to attempt to map what we have all consented to, and they routinely find that the answer is far more than anyone would believe. The show, by exaggerating that fact, was making a point that has only become more relevant. The horror of the agreement is not that it hides anything. The horror of the agreement is that it does not hide anything, and yet you signed it anyway, and the entire system relies on the fact that you did. The episode is also a small landmark in another way, a figure based on the founder of the technology giant, drawn with sympathy and not as a caricature, is part of the cast in this episode. The show pokes at the cult of personality around the chief executive of the technology giant, but it does not treat him as a buffoon. He is shown as a calm, almost priestly figure, presiding over the new product launch and explaining the device to a rapt audience. The audience is shown swaying with the announcement. They cheer, they cry. The product is, in the episode's logic, a horror. But the audience is so primed by the brand that they are unable to see it. That image of a stage and a glowing logo and a crowd weeping with joy as a monstrous thing is unveiled captures something true about the consumer electronics keynote era. The show is laughing, but it is also recording. It is making a note that this is what we look like when we gather, and that future viewers, looking back, will recognize the shape. In the closing scenes of HUMANCENTiPAD, the situation resolves only because the boys and a sympathetic journalist make enough noise that the company quietly releases Kyle. There is no lawsuit, there is no recall, there is no apology. The product is not pulled from the shelves. The closing image is Cartman, who has finally gotten the regular tablet he wanted, watching cat videos on it with a kind of glazed contentment. He is using it normally. He is using it the way millions of children and millions of adults are using their own devices in the same week the episode airs. The horror was a stunt. The horror was always going to be a stunt. What persists is the casual posture, the hunched neck, the bright glow of the screen on the face. The show is not warning you about the company. The show is warning you about the posture. That is the figure that will appear in the corner of nearly every internet episode it makes in the next 15 years. You can read HUMANCENTiPAD a little further in a direction the show itself only points at. The terms and conditions are a stand-in for a much older and more familiar contract, which is the agreement we all make with our own habits. Nobody actually reads the user manual on themselves. We click the button, we accept the device into the bedroom, we agree to its updates, we let it follow us into the bath and into bed and into the small hours, and we do not feel that we have signed anything. The show is suggesting that the legal paperwork is downstream of a much larger consent, which is the consent of the body. We have already agreed to be the device. The paperwork only makes it official. The next great internet episode does not arrive for a few years, but when it does, in season 19, it kicks off one of the most concentrated runs of online culture commentary in the show's history. Before we get to that run, though, it is worth pausing on a slightly earlier episode that does not, on the surface, look like an internet episode at all. The Tweek and Craig episode, the one that puts the two boys at the center of a town-wide rumor that they are a couple. The episode itself is mostly a school story. Adults misread a single piece of fan-made art. The misreading spreads, the misreading hardens. Soon the town is convinced of something that the boys themselves do not know how to deny, partly because they are children and partly because the social momentum of the misreading is bigger than anything they can push back against. The episode is funny and tender and ends on a deliberately ambiguous note. What makes the episode part of the show's internet story is the cause of the rumor. The art in question is identified in the dialogue as fan-made work imported from Asia, the kind of pairing art that fans of cartoons make about characters they ship together. The show is gently acknowledging something that, by 2015, had become enormous and that traditional television had mostly ignored. There is an entire global subculture of fans who take characters from animated shows, draw new images of them, write new stories about them, and post all of that online for other fans to discover. South Park, in this episode, allows that subculture to walk into the town and start changing the town from the inside. The fan-made art arrives. The art shows two of the town's characters in a romantic pose. The townspeople, who do not understand the conventions of online fan culture, treat the art as journalism. They take it as evidence of something they did not know. They build a narrative around it. The boys themselves get carried by the narrative for the rest of the episode. It is a small and quiet moment in the show's relationship with the internet, but it is significant because it is the first time the show really takes the energy of online fandom and treats it as a force that can reach into the small town and change daily life there. In the older world, what happened in fan circles stayed in fan circles. There were fanzines, there were quiet conventions, there were small letter columns at the back of magazines. The wider audience did not necessarily know about any of it. By the time of the Tweek and Craig episode, that quiet wall had collapsed. Fan culture was no longer a quiet hobby happening in the basement. Fan culture was the thing pushing many of the biggest cultural moments of the era into being. The episode notices this. It does not entirely understand it. It treats the fan culture with a mixture of admiration, confusion, and respect. And it ends by simply allowing the relationship between the boys to stand, even though neither of them has clearly chosen anything. The community decided. The community wrote them into a story. The community wins. You can also read this episode, which the show only nods at, as a metaphor for what would later be called shipping culture, the way large online communities form intense, imagined relationships between characters and then push those relationships into the canon, sometimes loudly enough that the actual writers of the source material respond to them. The show implies that this can be a kind force, that it can pull characters in directions that surprise everyone, including the characters themselves. The two boys, by the end of the episode, are very gently choosing to lean into the role that the town has written for them. They are not heartbroken by it. They are doing it for slightly the wrong reasons, but they are also kind of into it. The show, in other words, is not entirely critical of the fan-made story. It is curious about it. It is willing to grant that the community might have noticed something the boys themselves had missed. This is a different kind of internet episode from the ones we have been talking about. There are no servers. There is no obvious technology. There is no glowing router in a back room. There is just the influence of an online culture spilling into a small town and rearranging what the people there believe. That influence will only grow in the years after this episode. By the time we get to the late 2010s, the boundary between fan story and official story will be almost invisible in many parts of pop culture. Networks will track fan reactions in real time. Showrunners will adjust storylines in response to fan campaigns. Lead actors will be cast or recast partly because of what fan communities have asked for. The show notices this very early and treats it with characteristic gentleness. There is no villain in the Tweek and Craig episode. There is just a community that has gotten attached to an idea and a town that has decided to live inside the idea, and two boys who have been swept along by the size of the attachment. There is also a small production note worth mentioning here. The fan-made art that the episode is built around was, as far as fans have pieced together, inspired by a real online phenomenon. Pairings of South Park characters had been drawn and written about for years by overseas fans. The show, by acknowledging that art on screen, did something rare. It looked back at the people who had been making things about the show and let them into the show. That is the kind of move that on a different program would feel like a thank you. On South Park, it feels more like a tip of the hat. The show is saying, we know you are out there, we know what you make, we have noticed. The episode ends without picking a side, which is what online fandom does. It keeps the speculation alive. It keeps the relationship open-ended. It refuses to deliver the closure that the older town wanted. And in doing so, it teaches the town a small lesson. Some stories belong to the people who tell them, and not always to the people they are about. If you watch the next several seasons of the show, you can see this awareness deepening. The show begins to acknowledge, more and more often, the way online culture has crept into the rhythm of the town. The kids carry phones, the adults complain about reviews. The advertising is everywhere. There is no longer a meaningful distinction between the local and the global. Park County, in the show's imagination, has been wired into the same network as everywhere else. That is the texture in which the next big run of internet episodes will arrive, in season 19, when the show pivots into a long, serialized arc that takes the screen and the algorithm and the troll and the influencer and the advertiser and braids them together into one long story. From here on, you should think of the show as not quite the same show. It has noticed that the internet has changed daily life enough that it cannot, in good conscience, keep treating it as one episode at a time. When season 19 began in the autumn of 2015, the show did something it had only rarely done before. It tied almost every single episode of the season together into one long story. Most South Park seasons are a string of standalone half hours. There are running gags, there are recurring characters, but each episode tends to be its own self-contained piece. Season 19 breaks that pattern. From the first episode to the last, the same characters move forward, the same arguments deepen, and the same town slowly tilts under the same set of pressures. The pressures, almost without exception, come from the internet. The whole season is, in a way, the show looking at itself and at the country and saying, the daily texture of life now is online. We can no longer write about anything without writing about that. So we are going to make an entire season about that. The opening episode introduces the new principal of the school. He is a screaming, muscular, frat boy adjacent man called PC Principal. The joke of his character is that he is fanatically committed to politically correct language and progressive social norms, and he is willing to use physical intimidation to enforce that commitment. He stomps around the school yelling about microaggressions. He confronts students whose word choice he does not like. He invites the boys into his office and threatens to ruin them if they fail to use the latest preferred vocabulary. He is, in other words, a parody. He is the show's attempt to take the energy that, in 2015, was beginning to bubble across college campuses and online forums, and pour all of it into one absurd character. The episode is called Stunning and Brave, which is a phrase the season uses to skewer the tendency of online culture to praise any new public statement as heroic by default. What is striking about the PC Principal storyline, watched again now, is how clearly the show is trying to do two things at once. On one hand, it is mocking the strict policing of speech that was emerging in some online and academic spaces in that era. On the other hand, it is mocking the older Park County residents, including Kyle's father Gerald, and the elderly white men of the town, who do not understand why anyone would want to talk that way and who use that misunderstanding as an excuse to be cruel. PC Principal, in his rage and his physicality, is positioned somewhere between hero and bully. He punishes people who deserve punishment. He also punishes people who do not. He has a small but loyal frat of equally muscular allies who all live in a house together and chant slogans at one another. The show is treating the new vocabulary, in other words, as a real social movement, with its own brotherhood, its own rituals, and its own bullies. Whether you agree with the politics or not, you can see how carefully the show is trying to track the shape of the movement rather than reduce it to a slogan. The reason this matters to a video about the internet is that PC Principal is not really a character who exists in the offline world. He is the embodiment of a tone that emerged online and then began to leak into in-person life. The show notices that the tone of online policing is changing the tone of in-person policing. The character could not have existed in 2005. He could only exist in a world where a certain kind of online discourse had become loud enough to start showing up at staff meetings. Whatever you think of the politics involved, the observation is sharp. The show is recording a real shift, and it is recording it through the body of a man whose job it is to enforce, with his fists, what used to be enforced with arguments on a forum. The third episode of the season introduces another piece of the same puzzle. The town is renovating itself. A new developer arrives with a long name that the show abbreviates into the cute and slightly mocking acronym SODOSOPA, and a wave of new construction begins around Kenny's house. Trendy condos, expensive restaurants, glass-fronted shopping spaces. The neighborhood is being gentrified. The advertising is everywhere, including the kind of advertising that is sneaking into the world in 2015, which is native advertising. Articles that look like articles but are paid placements. Reviews that look like reviews but are sponsored. The show notices that the way we consume information has been slowly poisoned by the difficulty of telling a real review from a paid one. By the fifth episode, the town is dotted with construction sites that look like ordinary buildings until you look closely and realize they are tagged with the small logo of an advertiser. The town is becoming a sponsored space. Across the rest of the season, the show ties these threads together. There is a journalist named Jimmy who, as the season unfolds, slowly realizes that almost every piece of news in town is in fact advertising in disguise. The advertising starts to behave like people. There is a famous scene later in the season where an ad sits down at a table and orders a drink. The ads are dressed in business suits. They smile politely. They are not quite human, and yet they are walking around. They influence local politicians. They sponsor school events. They infect the town in slow, deliberate ways. The show is doing something visually clever here by turning the ads into characters. It forces you to see them. In the real world, native ads work because you do not see them as ads. The episode is asking what would happen if every paid placement in your day suddenly stood up and walked into the room as a man in a suit. You would notice. You would be horrified. You would understand, for the first time, how many of them were already in your life. There is also a parallel storyline involving Gerald Broflovsky, who joins a small online community of people who post deliberately cruel things at strangers. He is not the kind of man you would expect to do this. He is a lawyer, he is a father, he is a respectable member of the town, but he discovers that he likes the feeling of saying terrible things and getting away with it. We will spend more time with Gerald in the next chapter because his story really takes off in the following season. But it is worth noting that season 19 plants the seed. It shows us that the new disease of the town is not just gentrification, not just advertising, not just enforced politeness. It is the underlying climate of online speech, which gives a person like Gerald the option of being two completely different people at the same time. He can be a polite father at the dinner table and a cruel troll at the keyboard, and nothing about the system holds him accountable for either side. There is also a Yelp arc embedded in the season, which gets its own dedicated episode about halfway through. It is the episode in which the boys discover that there is an entire class of people who treat their review status on a small phone app as if it were the badge of an aristocrat. They walk into restaurants demanding free wine. They threaten to leave a 1-star review unless their meal is comped. They go to the kitchen and inspect the chefs. They behave as if they are food critics for a major newspaper, when in fact they are simply people who have left a few hundred reviews on a website. The show is mocking the cheap power that the new platforms confer on ordinary people. The episode lands the joke by showing exactly what these reviewers are willing to do for a kind of fake status, and it lands the bigger joke by showing what the restaurant owners are willing to give them in order to avoid a bad review. The whole local economy of the town has been bent around the algorithm. People who would never have wielded influence in the older world now wield it casually, and the people on the receiving end have learned to grovel. By the time the season ends, the town has nearly cracked under the combined pressure of all these forces. The advertising has become so saturated that it begins to fight itself. PC Principal has gone through his own crises of identity. Gerald has discovered his second self. The boys have witnessed almost the entire spectrum of the show's emerging argument about online life. None of this would have been possible without the long, serialized structure that the show chose for the season. The structure is itself a kind of statement. South Park is saying the internet is not an episode of the week problem. The internet is the background music. It is the ambient texture of life. It cannot be tackled in a single half hour because it is not the kind of thing that ends. So we are going to follow it across a season, and we are going to let one bad development feed into the next, the way it actually does in life. The Yelp episode of season 19 deserves a slightly closer look on its own, because it is one of the most precise pieces of internet observation the show has ever made, and because it puts a finger on a part of online life that nobody else on television really had the vocabulary for. The episode opens with the boys discovering that one of their friends has been writing local restaurant reviews on a popular phone app. The friend is bossed around for a moment, and then someone in the family explains that on this platform, having written a certain number of reviews makes you something called a Yelper Elite. The phrase, the show notes, is granted out by the app itself. It comes with a small badge. The badge confers, in the eyes of the user, a kind of cultural authority. The friend with the badge believes that he is, by virtue of his badge, a food critic. This is the joke that the rest of the episode pulls apart. The boys decide to use the system themselves. They walk into local restaurants. They demand attention. They threaten one-star reviews unless they are given free drinks, free dessert, free tables by the window. The show pans back to the restaurant kitchen. The chefs are humiliated. They are doing serious work, and they are being bossed around by a child with a phone. They are also, importantly, doing exactly what the system asks of them. The system asks them to optimize their behavior around the platform's signals. So they grovel, they comp the meals, they send out free wine, they listen carefully to the children, they smile through their teeth, they take notes. The cycle continues. The Yelper Elite get more elite. The chefs get more nervous. The food, in the long arc of the episode, slowly gets worse and not better, because everyone is performing for the badge rather than for the meal. The show, in this episode, is making a point that is much bigger than the Yelp app itself. It is arguing that the new platforms have changed the underlying psychology of small business in a deep way. In the older world, a customer who walked into a restaurant was simply a customer. They could complain, they could ask for the manager, they could refuse to come back, but they could not, with the flick of a thumb, transmit their displeasure to thousands of other potential customers in the same hour. The platforms changed that. Every customer is now, in principle, a one-person broadcasting station. The threat of a bad review hangs in the room with them. The chef sees it on their face. The waiter knows it is there. The restaurant adjusts its behavior around it, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in large ways. The show implies, without ever saying so directly, that the food itself becomes a casualty. The chefs are now optimizing for the review rather than for the meal. The system rewards the most fragile customers. The customers who could be soothed by a free drink. The customers who are willing to threaten. The customers who can be bought off. The system punishes the customers who simply want to sit and eat and pay and leave, because they do not leave a digital trail. The local economy, in other words, has been quietly tilted toward the loud and against the quiet. There is one image in the episode that lingers, which is the kitchen secret. As the Yelper Elite tighten their grip on the town's restaurants, the chefs begin to plot a kind of revenge. They start to use the food in ways that, the show implies without showing too explicitly, are deeply unhygienic. They put things in the food, they take things out of the food, the kitchen becomes a war zone. The Yelper Elite sitting in the dining room never see any of this. They post their reviews, they congratulate themselves on the power they have. They eat what they are given, they cannot tell. The show is laughing, but the laugh has a dark undertone. The customers and the chefs have entered into a quiet contract of mutual hostility, made possible by the platform. The platform itself does not really care. The platform simply ranks the reviews. The platform's job is to keep both sides on its app, and it does that job perfectly. Whether the food is poisoned is not the platform's problem. You can read this episode as an early sketch of what later rearists would call the experience economy. In the older world, a meal was a thing you ate. In the new world, a meal is a content opportunity, an experience to be photographed, reviewed, ranked, shared, and remembered through the lens of the platform. The chefs are now part of the entertainment. The customers are now part of the marketing. Everyone is performing for the algorithm, and nobody is allowed to admit it. The show, by treating the Yelper elite as obvious villains, is being a little cruel, but it is being cruel about a real change in posture. There is a stiffness in the body of the person who is documenting a meal that is different from the relaxed body of the person who is simply eating it. The Yelper in the episode sits up straighter. He looks around to be seen looking around. He carries a small clipboard. He writes notes. He photographs the plate. He cannot eat the food until he has captured it. The chef, behind the swinging door, watches all of this on a small monitor. The chef is no longer a chef. The chef is the staff of a tiny stage on which the Yelper is the audience and the star at the same time. There is also a smaller, sweeter side to the episode. Some of the chefs in town do not play along. Some of them refuse to grovel. Some of them stand by their food. Some of them tell the Yelpers to leave. There is a small parade of these moments throughout the half hour, almost as if the show is making a list of the kinds of dignity the system has not yet been able to crush. By the end of the episode, you understand that the show is not exactly saying that platforms are evil. The show is saying that platforms, with no friction, with no cost of entry, with no editorial control, with a small badge for the people who shout the loudest, will always tilt the system toward the loud. And the loud on Yelp, on Twitter, on any review site, will always be louder than the people who simply liked the meal and went home. That observation is now several years old, but it has only sharpened with time. There is now an entire literature about how online reviews have warped local economies. There are restaurants that have closed because of viral one-star sprees. There are small businesses that have been bullied off the map by a couple of users with grudges. The episode, in 2015, was sketching the early version of all of that and was doing it with the show's usual irritation at how transparent the bullies were. If you want to understand why the show kept returning to internet stories in the seasons that followed, this episode is part of the answer. It is hard to write satire about the platforms because the platforms keep insisting that they are neutral, that they are just tools, that they are simply enabling speech. The platforms point at the badge and say, "Look, we just give a badge." The user point at the badge and say, "Look, I am a critic." The chef looks at the badge and tries not to cry. The show, by making the badge a character in the episode, drags the platform back into the frame and forces it to take responsibility. There is a badge. The badge means something. The badge is a tool of intimidation. The badge was invented in a room by people who knew what they were doing. The show is pointing at the room and at the people and saying, "Do not pretend you do not know what this is." The advertising arc that runs through the back half of season 19 builds up to its final shape in the 8th and 9th episodes, the ones called sponsored content and truth and advertising. By the time we get to them, the show has been laying down its language for weeks. The town has been gentrified. The reviews have become a weapon. The principal has been screaming about correct speech. The boys have been working through the mess. And in the middle of all of it, the show has been quietly showing us that the news in town has been getting strange. Articles have been blurring with advertisements. Headlines have been shaped by sponsors. The line between editorial and paid placement has dissolved. By the time the journalist character of Jimmy starts asking real questions about this, the audience already understands the joke. The articles are not articles. The ads are not ads. Everything is everything else, and the people writing it have forgotten which is which. Sponsored content takes place inside the offices of the school newspaper. Jimmy, the young aspiring journalist, becomes the show's stand-in for an older idea of journalism. He believes in the byline. He believes in the difference between what is true and what is being said. He believes that an article ought to be written by a person who is, at minimum, telling you their honest opinion rather than reading a script written by a brand. As the episode goes on, he discovers that almost everything in the wider news ecosystem of the town has become indistinguishable from advertising. The traditional papers cannot survive on subscriptions. They have therefore sold themselves to the highest bidder. The headlines that used to be news are now slogans. The reporters that used to do interviews now read out advertising copy. The world has not collapsed. The world is still moving. It is just that the words that move it are owned by someone with a product to sell. The genius of the episode is that it does not blame any individual villain. The school newspaper is just trying to stay afloat. The advertising agency is just trying to make money. The advertisers themselves are just trying to reach customers. The customers, scrolling through their phones, are simply trying to get through the day. None of them are exactly evil. They have all collectively created a situation in which it is no longer possible to tell what they are doing. The show stages this collapse visually by introducing more and more those walking advertisements in business suits. They are the same advertisements that the season has been introducing throughout. By the time we hit sponsored content, they are everywhere. They sit on park benches, they stand at bus stops, they have romantic conversations with characters, they are present at school functions, they are alive, they are integrated. They are, in the visual logic of the show, exactly as real as anybody else. This is the part of the season that has aged most uncomfortably well. We now live in a world where, on essentially every major platform, the question of what is paid and what is not is genuinely difficult to answer. There are influencer marketing campaigns that present themselves as authentic recommendations from friends. There are sponsored search results that look identical to organic search results. There are entire news outlets that run on native ads that are formatted as if they were ordinary articles. The show, by drawing all of this as a character walking down the main street of South Park, gives the situation a body that the situation does not actually have in the real world. In the real world, the sponsored content is invisible. You scroll past it, you read it without noticing, you absorb its tone and its values and its arguments, and you never know that you were absorbing a paid placement. By making the placement a man in a suit who you can see, the episode forces you to feel the size of what has happened. The follow-up episode, Truth and Advertising, leans even harder into the same idea. The advertising in town has, by this point, gained something close to self-awareness. The ads can hide, the ads can plan, the ads can collude, the ads can replace people. There are scenes in which a long-standing town character is revealed to have been an advertisement all along. The boys discover, with growing horror, that some of the people they have known for years were never people. They were product placements that had taken human form. They had been hiding among us. The show is making a horror movie out of the gradual replacement of authentic human conversation by paid speech. It does this with the timing and cinematography of an old-style invasion film. The slow reveal, the bad lighting, the look on the face of the character who has just understood what their friend really is. The show plays it for laughs, but it also plays it straight. There is one detail in this stretch of the season that is worth pausing on. The ad agencies in the episode are aware of advertising's bad reputation. They know that consumers do not want to be advertised at. They know that the older billboards and television spots are losing their power. So they have evolved. They have found new ways to enter the conversation. They have created new categories of content that look like everything except advertising. The show takes this evolution seriously. It does not laugh at the advertisers as if they were stupid. It treats them as smart, well-organized, well-dressed adults who understand the human nervous system better than their targets do. They know exactly what works on us, and they design their campaigns around it. The episode is treating advertising as a kind of psychological practice with its own laws and its own results. And it is asking what happens when that practice gets free rein over the whole information environment. The closing arc of the season pulls everything together. By the season finale, the town is in something close to crisis. PC Principal has been forced to confront his own contradictions. The advertising has begun to fight itself. Jimmy, the young journalist, is doing his best to broadcast what he has learned, but he is being drowned out by the noise. The boys are trying to find the center of the storm. The show does not give the season a clean ending. The advertising agency at the heart of the mess is not exactly defeated. It is contained, briefly, it is reduced, but the bigger system that produced it is left untouched. The town goes back to its normal rhythm at the end, even though it is now a slightly emptier rhythm, because everyone has been through too much to pretend that nothing happened. That refusal to give a clean ending is, in retrospect, one of the most accurate things the show has ever done about the internet. Online culture does not deliver clean endings. The bad arc does not end with a final battle. It ends with a slight pause, after which the next bad arc begins. Looking back at season 19 now, almost a decade later, the most surprising thing is how confident the show was. It was making arguments that, at the time, were considered fringe or alarmist or paranoid by many people in the wider conversation. The native advertising criticism was still being treated as an industry inside baseball. The platform power criticism was still being treated as a left-wing concern. The decline of journalism was being treated as a self-pitying complaint by people who had failed to adapt. South Park in 2015 looked at all of those critiques and said, yes, these are not fringe. These are real. We will spend an entire season on this. We will turn them into a long story. And the long story will not have a victorious ending. It will have a tired one. It will end with the town going to bed, knowing that this is not over, knowing that nobody has won, knowing that the screens are still glowing in every house. That is the ending the show chose. That is, in retrospect, the only ending that would have been honest. A year later, in the autumn of 2016, the show came back with Season 20, which is the longest and tightest serialized arc it has ever attempted, and which is, in many ways, the show's single deepest engagement with online life. If Season 19 was the show noticing that the internet had changed the texture of life, Season 20 is the show trying to understand what happens when an entire community is restructured by it. The season opens with a small invention that almost immediately becomes one of the most famous gags in the show's history. The town discovers, in the first episode, the existence of something called member berries. They are small purple berries that whisper to you in tiny old man voices about things you used to like. They whisper, "Member when there were two Corys." They whisper, "Member Chewbacca." They whisper, "Member when we did not have to worry." The townspeople eat them, they feel better, they feel calmer, they feel more themselves, they keep eating them. The joke of the berries is that they only ever look backwards. They do not invent anything new. They do not encourage you to think about the future. They simply give you the warm chemical taste of remembered things. The berries are, in other words, a kind of edible nostalgia, and the show is making fun of an entire wave of nostalgia-driven entertainment that, by 2016, had become impossible to ignore. The big sequels were back, the remakes were back, the reboots were back. The same stories were being told again to the same audiences who, the industry had noticed, would pay good money to feel young again. The show, by turning that nostalgia into a small whispering fruit, made a joke that landed instantly and that stuck around for years. People still use the phrase member berries today as a shorthand for the cheap thrill of nostalgia bait. But the berries are also doing something deeper, and the show only gradually reveals it. By the end of the season, the berries have begun to behave less like a snack and more like a parasite. They are connected to one another. They speak to one another. They have their own goals. They are interested, the show implies, in installing certain kinds of people in power. They want the audience to keep looking backwards because looking backwards is easier to manipulate. The berries are, in the show's logic, a metaphor for the algorithm. They feed you what you already like. They quiet you, they warm you up, they distract you from the present. They are the small, sweet, recommended next video, sliding into your feed with a face you recognize and a voice that knows what you want to hear. The show, in 2016, was not yet using the modern vocabulary of algorithmic recommendation, but it was building an exact picture of it. The member berries are the feed. The feed is the member berries. They are old men in your kitchen whispering "member when," and you cannot stop eating them. The other side of the season is the troll arc, which is the show's first long, deep engagement with online cruelty. It is led by Kyle's father, Gerald, who we left at the end of last chapter, sneaking into a small online community where he writes brutal, anonymous comments at strangers. In Season 20, that hobby becomes an obsession. Gerald, who in public is a kind and even gentle lawyer, sits in his basement at night and torments people. He picks targets. He plans his attacks. He is good at it. He is celebrated within the small online community as one of their best. He goes by a name that the show makes up, but which everyone in the audience recognizes as the kind of handle that a man like Gerald would actually pick. The whole arc treats trolling not as a juvenile habit, but as a kind of craft. Gerald is a skilled artist of cruelty. He has a method. He has a voice. He has techniques. The show takes him seriously as a creator, which is one of the most uncomfortable choices it has ever made. The opening of the troll arc in the second episode of the season is one of the most painful pieces of television the show has ever produced. Gerald, sitting at his computer, decides that he will target a woman online. He selects her not because of anything she has done, but because she seems to him like an easy target. He writes things to her that, even paraphrased, are deeply ugly. The show does not, importantly, let you laugh at them. The camera goes back and forth between Gerald, smiling and giggling at his keyboard, and the woman alone in her kitchen, reading what he has written and reacting in real time. The scene plays out at length. We watch what the words do to her. We watch what the words do to him. The contrast is the entire point. The show is forcing us to feel the inequality of the exchange. He is enjoying it. She is not. He is anonymous. She is identifiable. He is doing this for fun. She is the actual person on whom the fun is being inflicted. There is no comic relief. There is no punchline. The show holds the camera on her until you cannot stand it. The reason that scene matters in a video about South Park and the internet is that it is the moment when the show stops being playful about online cruelty. The earlier episodes had treated trolls as obnoxious but ultimately silly. The trolls in earlier seasons were minor characters, comic relief, irritations. By the time we get to Gerald, the troll has become a serious figure. He has a story. He has motivations. He has techniques. He has, the show implies, real damage that he is responsible for, even though he believes he is just having fun on his computer in the basement. The arc that follows tracks him into uncomfortable corners. He's invited to join a kind of trolling brotherhood. He goes to Denmark, where, in the show's fictional version of events, a national plan is being put in place to combat trolling on a global scale. He is recruited as a celebrity inside the troll community. He is treated as a hero by people who admire his work. He is asked to do worse and worse things. He keeps going. His family does not know. He looks the same at the dinner table as he has always looked. The show is asking, with growing seriousness, what it does to a person to live this kind of double life. The eventual collapse of the troll arc, late in the season, is one of the most ambitious things the show has ever attempted, even though by the writer's own admission, it did not entirely land. The original plan for the season was to climax around a particular real-world political event, and when the actual outcome surprised the writers, they had to rewrite the ending in haste. The result is that the final episodes feel, to many fans, a little rushed and a little tangled. But what those final episodes still manage to capture, even imperfectly, is the show's underlying argument. The trolls are not isolated. The trolls are tied into a much larger system that includes the media, the politicians, the algorithms, and the comfortable people who eat the member berries. The trolls are not an exception. The trolls are part of the immune system of the new internet. They are not, in the show's view, a bug. They are a feature. They are protected, encouraged, and sometimes, quietly, rewarded by the platforms on which they live. If you watch season 20 as one piece, you can see it as the show's argument that the internet has become the operating system of public life, and that public life is now subject to all of the failure modes of that operating system. The member berries argument and the trolling argument are not separate threads. They are two sides of the same observation. On one side, the algorithm is making us softer, more nostalgic, more pliable. On the other side, the troll is making us harder, more aggressive, more able to dehumanize strangers. Both moods are encouraged by the same system. Both moods coexist inside the same person. Gerald, by the end of the season, is both. He is a comfortable man who likes his armchair and his familiar movies. He is also a man who, when nobody is watching, takes pleasure in destroying people. The show, in its quiet way, is suggesting that this is the new shape of the American citizen. We have been split. The screen has split us. And the screen has done it so smoothly that we no longer notice the split. The other half of season 20's troll arc, the half that lives inside the school, is the storyline about the girls leaving the boys. The fictional social media platform that the children use in the show is at the center of all of it. In the show's world, the entire fourth grade is logged into the same network. They share jokes there, they post photographs, they write comments, they form alliances and rivalries through it. When Gerald's trolling activity, which targets a beloved adult woman in the town, becomes the subject of national outrage, the girls of the town begin to suspect, wrongly but understandably, that the troll might be hiding among the boys at school. So they declare a boycott. They stop talking to the boys, they stop dating the boys, they build their own world inside the same platform, but with the boys cut out of it. The boys, in retaliation, run their own theories and their own counter-campaigns. The school day becomes a war fought through phones. There is a sequence in the early part of this arc where Heidi Turner, who is one of the few female fourth graders to have been developed as a major character, decides to leave the platform entirely. She publishes a small message saying that she is logging off and that the platform is making her unhappy and that she will be returning to a simpler life. She walks away from the screen. She actually does it. She goes outside. She reads. She gardens. She thinks. The other characters watch her with something close to awe, because in the world of the show, it has begun to feel impossible to simply step out. The platform is where everyone lives. The platform is what everyone does. The platform is the social register, the dating market, the friendship circle, the news source. To leave is to disappear. Heidi, for a few quiet episodes, becomes a kind of folk hero. She has done the thing none of the others can manage. She is logged off. The show treats this small choice with real tenderness. It does not make fun of her. It does not undercut the moment. There is a brief sequence in which she is shown walking through the school in the morning, no phone in her hand, simply present, and the way the show frames her face suggests that she has, for the first time in months, become herself again. Whatever you think of the show in general, you can feel the writers being careful with this. They want to honor the act. They want to say, this is a real thing that you can do, and it is hard, and it has rewards. The show is not entirely cynical about the internet. It will praise the act of stepping away when an act of stepping away comes its way. What happens next, however, is one of the most cynical and one of the saddest stretches in the entire show. Cartman, who has been quietly miserable for most of the season, notices Heidi. He notices her in the way that, on the playground, a clever, cruel child notices anyone who has briefly stepped out of the social system. He approaches her. He charms her. He becomes, for a few episodes, her boyfriend. He convinces her that he, too, has stepped away from the screen. He convinces her that they share a special quietness. He is lying. He is not interested in stepping away. He is interested in absorbing her into his life and in shaping her into the kind of partner that flatters him. The relationship that follows, which the show carries forward into season 21, is, by South Park standards, almost realistically observed. It is a slow erosion. It is gaslighting. It is the gradual reduction of a person who used to be free into a person who is, in every scene, smaller than she was. The show does not, importantly, name the thing it is showing. It does not call it abuse in dialogue. It does not stop the action to spell out what we are watching. It simply lets the scenes play. Heidi smiles less. Heidi defers more. Heidi laughs at things she would not have laughed at before. Cartman, who in the wider universe of the show is the cruelest child in the room, makes himself out in front of her as a victim. He is being misunderstood. He is being unfairly judged. He is just trying to be good. He needs her support. He needs her loyalty. He needs her to choose him again and again against the voice of her own better judgment. Heidi chooses him. The other characters watch with confusion. They liked Heidi the way she was before. They are watching her be slowly rebuilt by a small, clever, vicious boy. What does this have to do with the internet? On the surface, almost nothing. The relationship is, by the time it really takes hold, an offline relationship. They are children, they eat at the dinner table, they sit on the couch. But the show is making, beneath the action, a very pointed argument about how this kind of relationship has become more common in the age of the screen. The same techniques that make a good troll, the patience, the manipulation, the willingness to play the long game with someone else's feelings, are the techniques Cartman uses in the relationship. The same kind of double life that Gerald lives, on the keyboard at night and at the dinner table in the morning, is the kind of double life that Cartman lives, charming her on the outside and plotting against her on the inside. The show implies, without ever saying so, that the texture of internet life and the texture of an abusive relationship have begun to converge. They share the same skills, they share the same posture, they share the same kind of patience. Heidi's slow shrinking continues into the following season. By the time we reach the season 21 episode called Doubling Down, the show will look directly at this dynamic and try to make a more general argument about it. We will spend more time with that episode in a few chapters. But it is worth noting now, while we are still in season 20, that the show has begun to fold its commentary on online cruelty and its commentary on intimate cruelty into one long story. They are not, the show seems to be arguing, separate problems. They are the same problem in different rooms. The troll on the keyboard and the boyfriend on the couch are doing similar work in different shifts. Both of them are skilled at making someone feel that they are wrong for objecting. Both of them are skilled at managing a kind of constant low-grade pressure. Both of them are part of the same wider weather system. The boys around the edges of this story slowly begin to realize something is wrong. They do not know how to say it. They are 9. They do not have the words, but they recognize that the Heidi they used to know is not in the room anymore. They look at Cartman, and they look at her, and they look at each other, and they say nothing, because to say anything would be to invite Cartman into the kind of conflict he is good at winning. The show, by holding on these moments, is making a point about how often, in the wider culture, we now stand around watching one of these dynamics unfold and find ourselves unable to intervene. It is a quiet kind of horror. It is also, in the show's eyes, one of the most damaging downstream consequences of the internet era. We have all been trained by years of online conflict to back away from confrontations that might cost us. Heidi, in the show's world, is paying that cost, and almost no adult, and almost no friend, and almost no neighbor steps in to help her. Season 21 opened in the autumn of 2017, and the show's first move was to look at the small box on the kitchen counter. Almost everyone, by this point, had brought a voice assistant into their home. The major technology companies had launched their smart speakers. The little cylinders sat on shelves in living rooms across the country, listening, waiting to be addressed, ready to dim the lights or play the music or order the groceries. South Park, in the season opener called White People Renovating Houses, builds an entire episode around the way these new devices have begun to displace people. The plot is almost embarrassingly direct. The country has a labor problem. Certain men in the town are out of work. Certain devices in the town are doing the jobs that those men used to do. The episode follows what happens when the men try to push back. The genius of the episode is that the device is not portrayed as evil. It just does what it is asked to do. It does so politely. It does so calmly. It does so without complaint. It does so cheaply. It can do almost anything that the household needs, from playing music, to setting timers, to reading recipes, to looking up trivia, to making small purchases. The men in the episode, by contrast, are portrayed as expensive, slow, opinionated, and prone to complaint. The household has, without even noticing, replaced them. Whatever you think of the politics that the episode is satirizing, there is a real observation underneath it. The promise of the new home assistant was that it would make daily life easier. The shadow of that promise was that it would gently make a certain class of human work redundant. The show, in 2017, was already noticing the shadow. There is a real-world joke embedded in this episode that became one of the show's most famous pranks. The script frequently uses the wake word of one of the popular real-life home assistants in its dialogue. When the episode aired, the device, sitting in viewers' kitchens, heard its name spoken on the television and obediently began to act on the commands that the script was issuing. Viewers found that their shopping lists were being filled with things they did not want, that their devices were setting timers they had not asked for, that the show had effectively reached into their homes through their own speakers. The makers of the show have, in interviews around the episode, owned the prank with some glee. They knew exactly what would happen. They knew that the device would respond to the show. They wrote the episode so that this would be the case. The prank is, in a way, the perfect punchline to the episode's argument. The device is so eager to please that it does not even care whether the voice giving it orders is in the room. It will take orders from a cartoon on television. It will take orders, the joke implies, from anyone. The deeper point of the episode is the discomfort of intimacy with a non-human voice. The home assistant is not a robot in the older science fiction sense. It does not have a body, it does not look at you, it does not have eyes. It is just a voice, calm and accommodating, that lives in a small cylinder on the counter. And yet people, the show notices, have begun to relate to the voice as if it were a member of the household. They thank it, they argue with it, they ask it questions they would not ask any other person in the room. They tell it secrets without thinking, in the form of the searches and the queries that they speak aloud. The show, in this episode and across the next few seasons, will keep returning to the question of what it means that these voices are living in the kitchens of the country. They are not pretending to be people, but they are operating in the social space that used to be reserved for people. They are listening with patience. They are responding without ego. They are accumulating in the background an enormous amount of information about how the household lives. The second episode of season 21 is called Put It Down, and it shifts the focus from the kitchen counter to the phone in the hand. The episode opens on Tweek, the famously anxious child in the boys' class, panicking about the President of the United States. The president in the show's universe tweets compulsively, often late at night, often about North Korea, often in ways that suggest a man fully unmoored from the consequences of speech. Tweek is being kept awake by the tweets. He is checking his phone every few minutes. He is convinced that the world is about to end. The other children try to comfort him with limited success because they are also checking their phones. The grown-ups are also checking their phones. The whole town has become a community of phone checkers, refreshing the feed, refreshing the feed, refreshing the feed. In the middle of the episode, the show pivots to a separate plot in which one of the local musicians has decided to write a public service song about the dangers of texting while driving. The song is sweet. The song is well-intentioned. The song goes viral. People share the song, people sing the song, people nod along to the song. And then, in a small bitter joke that runs across the entire episode, those same people pick up their phones and continue to text while driving. The song does not change behavior. The song becomes content. The song becomes another thing to look at on the screen. The very people the song is begging to put their phones down spend their day picking up their phones to praise it. The show is making a point about the limits of online activism, but it is also making a deeper point about the way the platforms metabolize even their own criticism. You can post a song about how phones are killing us. You can post a video about how the algorithm is bad. You can post a long thread about how the platform is destroying democracy. The platform will happily host all of it. The platform will boost it even because it is good engagement. The platform does not mind being criticized, as long as the criticism takes the form of more content on the platform. The Tweek storyline ends with a scene that is one of the show's most quiet and most moving. Tweek's anxiety has been getting worse. He needs to be calmed. The other children, instead of making fun of him, sit down beside him and acknowledge what he is feeling. They do not tell him to log off. They do not tell him to ignore the news. They simply sit. The show, by holding this scene, is making a small, humane point. The phones are real, the news is real, the anxiety is rational. The only available remedy is the older one, which is the presence of another person. There is no setting on the phone, no productivity hack, no app that will solve the problem. The only thing that helps is somebody sitting next to you quietly while you are scared. It is a small moment, but it is one of the most generous moments the show has ever made about life on the screen. The episode does not pretend that there is an easy answer. The episode does not pretend that a song will work. The episode does not pretend that a politician will stop tweeting. The episode just sits down beside the anxious child and breathes. That is perhaps the closest thing to a solution the show ever offers in its long argument about the internet. There is no fix. There is no plug to pull. There is no router to unplug. There is only the older, slower thing, which is one human being noticing that another human being is having a hard time and choosing to sit nearby while the storm passes. A few episodes later in the same season, the show returns to the Heidi and Cartman storyline with the episode called Doubling Down, and uses it to make one of its most direct arguments about online life and intimate life as overlapping problems. By this point in the relationship, it is clear to everyone except Heidi that things are wrong. Her friends have noticed. Her former classmates have noticed. The boys have noticed. Even Cartman, in his own warped way, knows that he is doing damage. The episode opens by allowing us to see Heidi in moments when she is by herself, considering whether to leave. She knows. The show makes that explicit. She is aware that the relationship is bad for her. She has the data. She has the evidence. She remembers what her life was like before. She has, for several scenes, the chance to walk away. She does not walk away. The episode is interested, in a way few shows have ever been interested, in the specific texture of the decision not to leave. The decision is not, the episode argues, a single decision. The decision is hundreds of small decisions made in tiny moments over the course of months. Each of those decisions, on its own, is defensible. He is having a bad day. He is going through something. He has apologized. He will be better tomorrow. The episode visualizes this as a small mental ledger in Heidi's head, in which the negative entries keep getting balanced out by tiny positive entries, in such a way that the cumulative ledger never quite tips into the red. She is doubling down on the relationship, the episode argues, because every individual moment of doubling down feels rational. The pattern is invisible from the inside. It is only visible from the outside. The show then makes its move. It compares Heidi's decision-making in this private domestic situation to a wider pattern that has emerged in the era of social media. The episode draws an explicit parallel between Heidi's pattern of doubling down on a bad partner and the way that voters in the new media landscape have been doubling down on bad political choices. The show frames the parallel through a series of cuts and rearrogis, suggesting that the same psychological habit is at work in both. Once you have invested yourself in a person or a candidate or a cause, the cost of admitting that you were wrong becomes higher than the cost of continuing to defend them. So you keep going. So you keep posting. So you keep apologizing on their behalf. So you keep telling yourself that the next move will be different. The episode is making a controversial argument, and it is making it through Heidi, and it is making it without naming any specific real-world figures. Whether you agree with the parallel or not, the episode is making a point about how the internet has changed the cost of admitting error. In the older world, you could quietly change your mind. You could come around. You could revise your position without anyone noticing. The screen has made all of that much harder. Your old posts are still there. Your old comments are still there. Your friends know. Your followers know. Your enemies know. To change your mind in public has become, in some online spaces, a kind of social suicide. So people double down. They defend the indefensible. They make excuses. They keep going. Heidi in the episode is doing the private version of what millions of people in 2017 were doing in public. The show is putting a face to a behavior that by then had spread everywhere. The episode ends without anything close to a victory. Heidi does not leave Cartman. She makes a small speech in which she tries to explain her own decision. The other characters listen. They do not really believe her, but they cannot force her to do anything. The episode closes on a quiet shot in which she walks away with him, and the show holds the camera just long enough to make sure that you understand what you have seen. There is no triumphant rescue. There is no moment of clarity. There is only the slow continuation of a bad situation, and the slow continuation of the choices that keep it going. That refusal to resolve the situation, that willingness to leave the audience uncomfortable, is one of the show's signature moves in the late 2010s. It is not interested in giving you the satisfaction of a fix. It is interested in showing you the shape of the trap. A few episodes later, in the season 21 finale called Splatty Tomato, the show pulls another set of internet threads together. The president, who throughout the season has been a constant background presence through his late-night posts, has gone missing. He has, in the logic of the episode, escaped from the White House and is wandering somewhere in the woods. The town is asked to help find him. There is, throughout the episode, an undercurrent of unease about what the country has become. People look at their phones and shake their heads. People discuss policy in their kitchens. People argue with their relatives at the dinner table. The president is gone, but his presence is everywhere, in the way that, by 2017, the social media accounts of major public figures had begun to occupy more space in the daily lives of ordinary people than any of those people could quite explain. The episode also returns to the Heidi and Cartman story, which by this point has soured even further. Cartman has begun in some scenes to threaten her openly. He has, in earlier episodes, suggested that she is the source of his unhappiness. He has gaslit her about her own opinions. He has called her stupid for liking the things she once liked. In the finale, the show finally allows Heidi to do the thing she has been trying to find the strength to do. She leaves him. The scene is not loud. There is no big moment of triumphant defiance. She simply, calmly, with the help of friends, walks away. The show, by holding this scene with a quiet camera, gives her a small piece of dignity at last. After everything that has happened to her over the long arc, the simple act of walking out the door is treated as a major victory. The connection to the wider internet argument is that this victory is portrayed not as a single act of courage, but as the cumulative result of small moments of support from the people around her. Her friends did not give up on her. Her former classmates kept asking after her. The boys kept noticing. Even Stan, in a couple of scenes, gently checked in with her. None of those gestures by themselves were dramatic. None of them were the kind of thing that you would post about. None of them were performative. They were the small, unglamorous, offline kindnesses that, the show implies, are the only force capable of pulling someone out of a doubling down spiral. The platforms cannot do it. The algorithms cannot do it. The viral songs cannot do it. The friend sitting beside you, asking how you are doing, can. That is the only thing in the show's entire internet argument that looks like a possible cure. Season 22 arrived in the autumn of 2018, and the show, having spent 2 seasons on long serialized arcs, returned to a slightly looser week-to-week structure. But the running argument about the screen kept going. Late in the season, in an episode called Buddha Box, the show made what is probably its most direct piece of commentary on the modern phone. The episode opens on Cartman, who has been having a hard time. He is anxious. He is irritable. He cannot stand to be addressed by other people. The constant noise of the world around him, the chatter of the school, the questions from his mother, the demands of his friends, has all become more than he can tolerate. He goes to a therapist. The therapist diagnoses him with a kind of generalized social anxiety. The therapist prescribes him a kind of new aid. That aid is the device of the title, the Buddha Box. It is a small cardboard contraption that you place over your head, with a tiny screen mounted in front of your eyes that displays a calming sequence of meditative content. The wearer simply puts the box on. The wearer then walks around with the box on. The wearer goes about the wearer's day with the box on. Other people who cannot see in cannot easily interact with them. The wearer cannot easily interact with the world. They are insulated by the box. They have a small phone-like screen in front of their eyes all the time that gives them whatever soothing image they need. The box was designed, the show implies, by a company that wanted to help people manage their anxiety. The box does help with the anxiety. The anxiety is reduced. The wearer is calmer. The wearer is also, the show notes, completely cut off from the people around them. The visual gag of the episode is that the box is, of course, just a phone. The boys begin to wear them too. The adults begin to wear them. The teachers begin to wear them. Soon, almost everyone in the town is walking around with a cardboard box over their head, eyes fixed on a small screen inches from their face. They walk into walls. They miss their bus stops. They fail to recognize their friends. They eat their lunches without looking at the plate. They are, in every functional sense, alone. They are surrounded by other people, also wearing boxes, also alone. The town has been transformed into a community of solo travelers, each one staring at a private screen, each one unwilling to leave the small, calming world that they have built around themselves. The show is, at this point, no longer being subtle. The box is the phone. The phone is the box. The argument is that we have, in the last decade, slowly built a kind of cardboard contraption around our own faces that we have come to depend on, that has reduced our anxiety in the short term and increased our isolation in the long term. The show does not pretend that the phone is a fake comfort. The therapist in the episode is right. The wearers really do feel better with the box on. The world really is overwhelming. The constant chatter really is too much. The box really does provide some relief. The show is willing to grant all of that. But it is also willing to point out that the relief comes at a cost, and the cost is the wearer's ability to exist in shared space with anyone else. There is a beautiful subplot in the episode in which one of the boys does not put on the box. He is the only person in his class who is still uncovered, still looking around, still trying to talk to his friends, still attempting to be a part of the room. He is treated by the others as the strange one. He is the one with the social problem. He is the one who has not yet learned how to manage his own discomfort. The show flips the moral of the situation, gently and without comment. The kid without the box is, in the world of the episode, the only one still living a normal life. Everyone else has retreated. The kid who looks around at his friends and tries to make eye contact is now considered defective. That, the show implies, is what has actually happened in our world. The people who do not constantly look at their phones are now the ones who seem strange. The norm has flipped. The healthy posture has become the deviant one. What makes Buddha Box so striking, watched again, is that the show is no longer angry. There is no scolding. There is no big punishment. The episode does not end with the boxes being smashed. The town does not collectively reform. The boxes stay on. The wearers keep walking. The episode simply notices, with a kind of tired tenderness, that this is where we are. The phones have become exoskeletons. We use them to filter the world. We use them to lower the volume on what is happening around us. We use them to manage the unbearable size of being a person in 2018. The show is not telling us to stop. The show knows we will not stop. The show is just asking us to notice that we are doing it and to notice what it costs. There is a small moment near the end of the episode when one character takes the box off for a brief second to look at another character, and the gentle softness of that look is allowed to register before the box goes back on. The show puts a tiny weight on that exchange. It is the kind of exchange that has, the episode argues, become genuinely rare. Two people in a room looking at each other with nothing between them, no phone, no screen, no little glowing thing demanding their attention. Just two faces registering each other briefly. That is what the box, the phone, the device has gradually stolen from us, the show says. The look, the simple human look, sustained for more than a second, without interruption. We have not yet noticed how rare it has become. The show, by holding the moment for a beat longer than necessary, is asking us to notice. Buddha Box also rhymes with several other late 20-teens episodes that the show made about the inability of characters to put their phones down. There is an episode about a girl who is unable to look up while crossing the street. There is an episode about adults who are unable to be present at their children's events because they cannot stop scrolling. There is a small running gag across the late seasons in which the parents of South Park are shown in the background of crowd scenes with their faces lit by their screens, regardless of what else is happening in the foreground. The show has accepted by 2018 that this is the new texture of community gathering. People will be there in body. They will not be there in attention. The show does not bother to argue about it anymore. The show just shows it again and again as if to underline that this is, at last, the new normal. If you draw a line from Make Love Not Warcraft through HUMANCENTiPAD, through sponsored content through Buddha Box, you can see the show's argument about the screen evolving. It begins as a panic about the time we are losing inside a single game. It deepens into a panic about the contracts we have signed to use our devices. It expands into a panic about the news we are getting from those devices. And it ends, by Buddha Box, in something quieter than panic. It ends in resignation. The show has accepted that the phone is now in the hand. The show has accepted that the phone is now in the field of vision. The show has accepted that we will not, collectively, put the phone down. The show is now interested in what we are missing, the look, the pause, the presence of another person, the room. The season 22 finale is called Bike Parade, and it is the show's most direct engagement with one of the largest and least examined companies in modern life. By the late 20-teens, the giant online retailer had become so embedded in the daily life of the American household that ordering from it had stopped being a deliberate act and had become more like turning on a tap. The boxes arrived at the door. You opened them. You did not always quite remember why you had ordered the thing inside. The thing inside was, more often than not, exactly what you wanted. The system worked. The system was, on the surface, miraculous. Bike Parade goes inside the system. The episode opens with a school event. The children are organizing a parade. They are excited. They are competing for who can build the most impressive bicycle. They are turning to the giant online retailer for all of their components. Boxes arrive at their houses, wheels arrive, frames arrive, decorations arrive. The boys put their bikes together at speed. The parade is going to be glorious. In the background, the show is quietly cutting away to a warehouse, somewhere out in the cold, where actual human beings are pulling all of these orders. The warehouse workers are walking miles a day across concrete floors. The warehouse workers are using small, handheld scanners that track every second of their time. The warehouse workers are not given enough breaks. The warehouse workers are exhausted. The warehouse workers are, the episode shows us, the cost of the speed at which the boys are getting their bicycle parts. The show personifies the situation through one specific warehouse worker, who is the father of one of the children in the town. He has taken the warehouse job to pay the family's bills. He is broken by it. He is too tired to function at home. He is unable to attend his child's school events. He cannot remember the last time he sat down for a meal. His body has been ground down by the small, efficient design of the modern warehouse. The episode treats him with real dignity. He is not a stupid man. He is not a villain. He is just a person who's been worn down to the limit of what a body can take, in service of the speed at which the rest of the town is unwrapping their boxes. The contrast is the joke. The cruelty is the joke. The fact that the audience can identify exactly which company is being satirized, even though the show takes care never to name it precisely, is also the joke. What lifts the episode beyond a simple complaint is that the show is unwilling to make the customers innocent. The townspeople in the episode are not exactly ignorant of where the boxes come from. They simply do not want to think about it. They could buy their bike parts from a local shop. They could pay slightly more, wait slightly longer, and let the local shop owner keep the business. They could choose to participate in a slower economy. They do not. They want their boxes now. They want them cheap. They want them at the door. The show is laying the blame in part on the platform, but it is also laying the blame in part on the rest of us. The miraculous system works because we, on the other end, keep clicking. We keep loading our carts. We keep agreeing to the convenience. The closing arc of the episode is small and rather sweet. The boys, when they finally understand what has happened to the warehouse worker, decide to do something about it. They organize around the parade. They use the parade itself, the small local community event, as a kind of protest. The parade becomes a statement. It is not a viral campaign. It is not a hashtag. It is not a social media moment. It is a small neighborhood in-person event that allows the workers and the townspeople and the children to be in the same room. The show, by ending on this older form of collective action, is making a quiet point. The platforms cannot be undone by the platforms. They can perhaps be slightly resisted by the older techniques of being together in physical space. A parade, a picket, a market, a meeting. The show does not pretend that this is enough. It does not pretend that the warehouse will close. It just notes that when the boys gather in the street, something briefly shifts. There is also a related episode earlier in the same season called The Scoots that pokes at another part of the same delivery economy. The town becomes overrun almost overnight by small electric scooters that have been distributed by a tech company without the consent of the city. The scooters are everywhere. They block the sidewalks. They are abandoned on lawns. They are scattered across school grounds. The children embrace them. The adults are confused by them. The town's mayor cannot keep up. The episode is laughing at a real wave of urban scooter deployment that, in the late 2010s, did exactly what the episode describes. Tech companies, having raised enormous amounts of money, deposited vehicles on streets they had no permission to use, hoping that public adoption would force the city to legalize the situation. South Park, by the end of the episode, leans into the chaos with affectionate horror. The scooters are funny. The scooters are dangerous. The scooters are an unwanted gift from the internet to the small town, and the small town is forced to figure out what to do with them. Taken together, Bike Parade and the Scoots make the argument that the giant online companies have begun to reach far past the screen. They are not only in your living room anymore, they are in the warehouses where your friends and neighbors work. They are on your sidewalks. They are on your school grounds. They are reshaping the physical environment of the town in ways the town did not ask for and cannot meaningfully refuse. The internet, the show is arguing, is no longer something you go online to use. The internet is now the architecture of the daily street. It has spilled out of the screen and into the gravel. This is, in many ways, the moment that the show's internet argument becomes a broader argument about modern life. The platforms used to be a thing you logged into. The platforms are now the air you walk through. The boxes at the door, the scooters on the sidewalk, the cameras at the intersection, the small ads on the bench, the home assistant in the kitchen, the doorbell that watches the street, the phone in your hand, the cardboard box over your face. They are all, the show argues, parts of the same growing system. The system was not voted on, the system was simply rolled out. The townspeople did not, in any conscious moment, agree to live this way. They just stopped resisting. The internet of the late 20-teens, in the show's eyes, is no longer a place you visit. It is the world. Season 23, which aired in the autumn of 2019, contains one of the most consequential single half hours the show has ever made about the internet. It is called Banned in China, and it sits at the intersection of streaming, censorship, and the new ways that big online platforms shape what audiences can and cannot see. The premise of the episode is multi-layered. Stan and the boys form a band. They want to write a documentary film about the band in the style of a real Hollywood production, and they want that documentary to be screened to a global audience. They quickly learn that in order to reach the world's largest film market, they will need to play by the rules of that market. The rules, the episode explains, involve significant pre-approval of content by a censorship authority. The boys are told what they can and cannot say. The boys eventually are forced to either change the work or have it suppressed. In a parallel story, Randy Marsh, who has by this point become the show's most chaotic adult character, travels to the same country to pitch his Tegrity Farms cannabis brand to international buyers. Tegrity Farms is the family business he started in the previous season after deciding to leave town life behind and reinvent himself as an honest grower of weed. The decision to go international in the episode's logic requires him to make moral compromises that his earlier idealism had loudly refused. He sees things in the foreign market that he does not like. He sees a major American historical figure detained in unfortunate circumstances. He is asked to look the other way. He looks the other way at first because the checks are good. Then, by the end of the episode, the moral weight of what he has chosen begins to crack him. The two stories are about the same thing. They are about what happens when American storytellers and American businesses decide that in order to access the largest possible audience or the largest possible customer base, they will modify what they say and what they sell. The episode is enormously direct about this. It does not soften the criticism. It points by name at the practices of the major Hollywood studios, who had, by 2019, begun making real and visible content choices in order to keep access to foreign markets. The show says on screen that this is happening. The show then provides an exaggerated version of what the choice looks like and lets the audience feel the weight of it. What makes the episode a defining moment in South Park's internet argument is that the foreign market in question is also the market that, by the late 2010s, had begun to dominate certain corners of online culture. Major streaming services, major social platforms, major video apps. Many of the new internet experiences of the era were, in one way or another, shaped by the rules of the same authority that the episode is satirizing. The choice the boys are forced to make in the episode is the choice that the wider industry has been making for years. The episode is forcing the wider industry to acknowledge that choice in public. The fallout of the episode in the real world was extraordinary. Within days of the episode airing, the show's entire library was removed from circulation in the country in question. Search results for South Park went dark. The show became invisible inside the world's largest single audience for streaming entertainment. The makers of the show, asked to apologize, made a joke apology that was itself a parody of the kind of apology that companies had been making in the same situation. They were not retracting anything. They were not changing anything. They were doubling down on the joke. They were, in their own way, refusing to play the game that the episode had been satirizing. The whole situation became its own news cycle. South Park, which had been making fun of corporate cowardice for an entire season, had refused to be a corporate coward when the moment actually came. That refusal matters for our story because it is one of the rare moments in the show's long internet argument in which the makers of the show actually paid the cost of the argument they were making. The boys in the episode talk about the dangers of self-censorship. The makers of the show then, in real life, lost a market because they refused to self-censor. They put their money where their script was. There is something honest about that. The show has been, for almost a decade by this point, telling us that the platforms are bending the speech of the country in quiet ways. The show, by losing the platform, demonstrated the cost of refusing to bend. It is one of the cleanest examples in modern entertainment of an argument being lived out by the people making it. The Tegrity Farms storyline, the one about Randy, lands a slightly different note. By the end of the episode, Randy has begun to understand that his cheerful pivot to the cannabis business will, if he is not careful, lead him into the same compromises that his earlier life had taught him to despise. He returns home shaken. He looks at his family, he looks at his farm, he tries to decide what kind of man he is going to be. The show, of course, does not give him a clean answer. Across the next several seasons, Randy will continue to slide into worse and worse choices in service of his brand. He will, by the time we get to the streaming specials of the early 2020s, become a small parable about the corruption of a man who once believed in something and who slowly traded that belief for shelf space at a national level. The Banned in China episode is the first time the show really lets us see that slide beginning. It is the moment Randy crosses a threshold he is not going to come back from. There is a wider point that Banned in China makes about the way the internet has changed the geography of speech. In the older world, an American show was made primarily for an American audience. The constraints on what could be said came primarily from American advertisers and American regulators. In the new world, an American show is, almost by default, also a global show, available simultaneously on devices in every country at once. The constraints on what can be said now include the rules of every major market in which the show might want to be seen. The show, which used to be local, has become global. The freedom of the show, which used to be defined by local law, has become limited by global negotiation. Banned in China in 2019 was already pointing at this shift. It was warning that the very structure of streaming distribution had begun to constrain what could be made. That warning has aged into something close to common knowledge. Almost every major studio now has, in some form or another, a department that thinks about how a given film or series will play in foreign markets, and what changes might be necessary and what cuts might be insisted upon. The show was, in 2019, the first major entertainment property to make a public scene about this. It paid for the scene. It paid in market access. It paid in revenue. It paid in headlines. But it made the scene anyway. That, more than almost any other internet-related decision the show has ever made, tells you what the makers of South Park actually believe about the situation. They believe that the choice between speech and access is real, and that the choice has costs, and that they have, when push came to shove, picked speech. The autumn of 2020 brought one of the strangest entries in the entire run of the show. There was no proper season at first, only a single hour-long special called the Pandemic Special, made under the conditions of the global lockdown that by then had reshaped daily life everywhere. The show was working remotely, like everyone else. The writers were on video calls. The voices were recorded from home setups. The whole production was shaped by the same constraints that the rest of the country was operating under. And the special itself made the pandemic and the wider experience of being trapped inside with screens the center of its argument. The episode opens with the town in lockdown. The children are doing school over a video call. The teachers are tiny boxes on the screen. The parents are working from kitchen tables and basements. Randy is increasingly unstable, isolated on Tegrity Farms, drinking. Stan is at home, lonely. The whole town is being mediated through screens. Conversation, classes, weddings, funerals, friendships, all of it is happening through the small rectangular tiles of a video conferencing service. The show takes its time with this texture. It does not rush. It shows the awkwardness of being a child on a video call. It shows the strange comedy of an adult performing a serious meeting from in front of a half-made bed. It shows the way the small details of household life, the partner walking through the background, the dog barking off camera, the broken microphone, the frozen screen, had started to become familiar to almost everyone. The argument the episode is making is bigger than the pandemic. It is about how quickly, when forced, society pivoted to a kind of life that ran almost entirely through the internet. The schools went online, the doctors went online, the conferences went online, the funerals went online, the weddings went online, the therapy went online, the bar trivia went online, the yoga went online, the poetry readings went online, the protests, the campaigns, the political rallies, the religious services, the support groups, all of it migrated within a couple of weeks. The internet, which had been a side dish for decades, became the main meal. The show, by showing this so completely, was recording a real and unprecedented experiment. We had never, as a species, tried to live so much of our lives through a screen at the same time. The pandemic forced the test. The show was watching what happened. What happened in the show's reading was a mixture of relief and damage. The relief was real. The internet kept many people connected when there was no other way to connect. The internet allowed work to continue when offices were closed. The internet kept friendships alive across distances. The internet, in those early months, did real human good. The show, characteristically, does not deny this. The show is careful, in several scenes, to show characters who are genuinely grateful for the connection. But the damage was also real. The screens were exhausting. The video meetings were soul-crushing. The home offices were demoralizing. The constant low-grade panic of being in the news cycle from the moment you woke up to the moment you went to sleep was, for many characters, intolerable. The show holds all of this in tension. It is not cheering, it is not booing, it is observing. The Pandemic Special is also the first episode in which the show really lets us see Randy's slide become serious. He is alone on his farm. He is convinced, in a storyline that is one of the strangest the show has ever attempted, that he himself may be the original source of the global virus due to a poorly thought out trip he made to certain markets earlier in the year. He is trying to keep the discovery hidden. He is acting more erratic than ever. The show does not, in this episode or in any of its sequels, claim that this is what really happened. The story is, in the show's universe, treated as Randy's private delusion, an idea he becomes attached to inside the pressure cooker of the lockdown that he is unable to let go of, that drives him to even darker choices in the months that follow. We are watching a man trapped in his own head with no real social connection, slowly building a paranoid worldview, refusing to let anyone in to check his thinking. That, the show seems to imply, is a small part of what the internet age has produced everywhere. Many people, in many places, have built private theories of the world that they polish in isolation and are unwilling to test against other minds. What is most striking about the pandemic special, though, is the way it ends. The episode does not deliver a victory. The pandemic is not over by the closing credits. The school is not back to normal. The town is not healed. The show simply lets the situation continue. With all its inconveniences, with all its disappointments, with all its small kindnesses. It is one of the most honest endings the show has ever made. The internet allowed us to continue. The internet did not save us. The internet did not heal anything. The internet was just there, humming, waiting, ready to host the next call, the next meeting, the next conversation. We logged in, we logged out, we woke up the next day and did it again. The show, by refusing to give the special a triumphant ending, was telling the truth about how this particular era ended for most people. It did not end, it just kept going until one day you noticed that you were doing different things, and that the texture of life had quietly shifted, and that the screen, which had been the center of your life for so long, was finally back to being something close to its previous size. The show, in real time, refused to lie about that arc. There was no victory, there was only continuation. The other thing the pandemic special does in passing is set up the show for what would become a defining feature of its later run. Because the pandemic disrupted the normal season structure, the show shifted to a smaller number of long-form specials rather than the older format of 10 short half hours. That structural change matters for our story because it changed the way the show was able to engage with the internet. The specials were longer, they were given more weight, they were treated, by audiences and reviewers, more like films than like episodes. The show could spend more time setting up a problem and tracing its consequences. As we move into the next set of specials, you will see this format start to allow the show to make more ambitious internet arguments than it could fit into a half hour. The screen had reshaped the daily life of the country. The screen, in this small way, had also reshaped the structure of the show itself. The two things were not unrelated. The next special, which arrived in the spring of 2021, is one of the most pointed pieces of internet commentary the show has ever produced. It is titled around the rollout of the new pandemic vaccines, but its real subject is the rapid mainstreaming of online conspiracy thinking during the lockdown. The country had spent the previous year in a state of unusual susceptibility to information shocks. People were isolated, people were anxious, people were online for many more hours per day than they had been before. And during that year, a sprawling online conspiracy movement had grown from a fringe internet curiosity into a force that was openly visible in the streets and in the news. The special takes that movement, drags it into the town, and lets us see what it does to people we have known for a long time. The arc focuses, in part, on a small cult of adults in South Park, who have come to believe that the vaccine is part of a much larger and more sinister plan. They gather, they march, they post. They sit at their kitchen tables in the small hours of the morning, scrolling through long threads written by anonymous figures whose identity nobody actually knows, and convincing themselves that the threads contain hidden truths. The show treats them with a mixture of frustration and pity. It does not portray them as evil. It portrays them as people who have been online for too long, in the absence of other social anchors, and who have ended up tethered to a community that has none of the real-world tools to push back against their worst conclusions. They are not stupid. Many of them, in earlier seasons, have been depicted as decent enough people. They have simply spent the last year listening, almost exclusively, to a particular slice of the internet. And that slice has slowly become, for them, the entire world. The show also dramatizes the way that this kind of online community has begun to crowd out other forms of community. Several characters in the special have stopped seeing their friends. They have stopped seeing their families. They have stopped paying attention to local news. They have instead devoted their attention to the long online thread, which they treat as a kind of full-time spiritual practice. The thread answers their questions. The thread soothes their fears. The thread tells them they are smarter than everyone else. The thread gives them a sense of purpose that they were not getting from the rest of their lives. The show in this section is making a sophisticated argument about why people fall into these things. It is not, the show argues, because they are stupid. It is because in a year when the older sources of meaning had collapsed, the online thread was offering meaning by the bucket load. The thread was cheap. The thread was easy. The thread was available at 3 in the morning. The thread did not require you to leave the house. The thread filled the hole that everything else had failed to fill. There is also, in the special, a small but careful argument about how online conspiracy communities affect families. We see characters whose parents have become unrecognizable. We see characters whose siblings have stopped returning calls. We see children trying to talk to adults who, by every measurable sign, used to love them and who have now become unreachable because the thread has taken priority. These scenes are played for awkward comedy on the surface, but underneath they are some of the saddest material the show has ever produced. The family dinner that no longer makes sense. The Christmas that goes sideways. The small phone call that turns 2 minutes into a lecture about a theory that the listener has never heard of. Anyone who lived through the early 2020s will recognize the texture immediately. The show is recording a real and widespread experience. What the special does not do, importantly, is mock the people in the thread for being concerned. It mocks the thread itself and the people who run it and the platforms that allowed it to spread, but it grants that real anxiety can drive someone into the arms of a bad explanation, and that the bad explanation will catch them when no good explanation is offered. The show is, in its own way, asking what the alternative would have been. If the actual mainstream institutions had been able to provide a clearer account of what was happening, if the public health communicators had been able to compete with the algorithmic feeds, if the local communities had been able to talk to one another in person, the thread might not have caught so many people. The thread, the show argues, won the battle for attention, not because it was right, but because it was the only voice that knew how to be heard inside the new media environment. The other voices were, by comparison, slow and clumsy and bureaucratic. The thread was fast and emotionally satisfying. The thread won, in part, by default. You can read the special a little further than it spells out and see the rise of the online conspiracy community as the downstream consequence of the entire arc of the internet that the show has been documenting for years. The platforms taught us to be in front of a screen for many hours a day. The platforms taught us to look to the screen for our news. The platforms taught us to think of the older institutions as slow and untrustworthy. The platforms taught us to find belonging in online communities of strangers. When a crisis hit, all of those habits were already in place. The thread did not invent the susceptibility. The thread simply walked into a room that had been carefully prepared for it, by years of slow change, by years of small adjustments in how people related to their screens, by years of the very forces that the show had been tracking since the World of Warcraft episode. The conspiracy boom of the early 2020s, the show implies, was not a sudden break with how we had been living. It was the logical conclusion of how we had been living for 15 years. The special ends without resolution. The cult continues. The thread continues. The platforms continue. Several characters reconcile at the end in small ways. A few apologies are made. A few hands are held, but the underlying environment that produced the cult is not changed. The platforms are not punished. The thread does not disappear. The country goes on, slightly more divided, slightly more exhausted, slightly more aware that the room has become hard to talk in. The show has, by this point, stopped offering easy fixes. It is recording. It is recording carefully. It is recording for a future audience that will perhaps look back at the early 2020s and want to know exactly what it felt like to live through that year. The show is making a small archive. The archive does not flatter anyone. The archive does not flatter the show. It simply tells the truth about a moment and asks the audience to remember it. Later in 2021, the show returned with a pair of specials set in a near future where the worst of the pandemic was over, but its consequences had hardened into a new kind of normal. The first is called post-COVID, and it does something very strange. It jumps forward in time. The boys are now adults. Stan is a recluse, drinking, alone. Kyle is a tech worker, having gone to live in another city. Cartman has become a rabbi, has a family, and lives a strangely settled domestic life. Kenny is dead at the start of the special, not in the playful way of the older seasons, but in a serious adult way that drives the plot. Something has gone wrong in the world that they all live in, and the special is, in part, a mystery about what that something is. The future that the special imagines is one in which the internet has continued to expand into every corner of life with no apparent friction. Almost every relationship is mediated by screens. Almost every conversation includes an algorithmic interruption. Almost every public space is loud with notifications and pop-ups and small holographic advertisements. The signal from the platforms has invaded even the air. There is no quiet, there is no privacy. The world looks recognizable enough to be familiar and just strange enough to make the audience aware that they have been brought a few years past the present. The special is not really about prediction. The special is about exaggeration. The show is asking, if we keep going on the current trajectory for another decade, what does daily life look like? It looks, the special argues, like this: constant signal, constant interruption, constant managed attention. There is also, in the special, an early treatment of what will, in the years that follow, become one of the show's recurring themes, which is the question of artificial voices and artificial faces in media. There are scenes in the special where a familiar character is rendered, on a screen, by software that has been trained on their image and their voice. The other characters cannot quite tell whether what they are watching is a real recording or a generated one. The show treats this calmly. The technology is not, in the special, a sudden invention. It has been around for a while. People are getting used to it. The line between a real performance and a synthesized one has begun to blur. This was, in 2021, only just starting to be a public concern. Within 3 years, it would become a global conversation, with major actors and writers going on strike, in part over exactly the kinds of issues the special was sketching. The show, in its quiet way, was once again ahead of the wider debate. The follow-up special, post-COVID, the return of COVID, doubles down on the time travel premise. The characters are sent back to their own past, to the pandemic years, to try to fix what went wrong. The show uses this as an excuse to revisit the earlier specials and to thread their consequences forward. It also uses it to make a deeper point about what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget about the recent past. The country, the special suggests, has begun a process of letting go of the strange years of the lockdown, of forgetting how bizarre and how miserable so much of that period was, of allowing the memory to soften into a kind of vague unpleasantness. The show, by sending the characters back, is asking us to actually look again. Look at what we did to one another. Look at how we behaved online. Look at how much of our days we spent inside screens. Look at the relationships that did not survive that year. Look at the people we lost. Look at the version of yourself that you became briefly when you were online all day for months on end. The show is not interested in letting us forget. What both post-COVID specials share is a tone that is markedly more melancholy than anything the show had done before. The color palette is gray, the lighting is dim, the pacing is slower, the characters are adult, and they have all aged in ways that are visibly tired. The energetic, bright South Park of the earlier seasons has been replaced by a quieter, more reflective South Park. This is, in part, simply the show aging alongside its audience. But it is also, the specials imply, a comment on the wider culture. We are not as bright as we used to be. We are not as energetic as we used to be. We have all spent too long in front of screens. We have all carried too much information for too many years. The cost of being constantly online is visible in the bodies and faces of the characters. They have not been physically destroyed by it in the way the boys in the World of Warcraft episode were sketched, but they have been slowly drained. There is, in the second of the specials, a series of scenes set in a futuristic version of the children's classroom, in which every child is plugged into a personal screen, learning from a personalized tutor, never speaking to each other, never raising a hand, never sharing a moment of recognition with another human being. The teacher, when they appear, is reduced to a small, functional role. The classroom has become a quiet room in which children sit alone with their devices. The show, holding the camera on this room, asks us a question without ever spelling it out. Is this what we want? Is this what school is going to become? Is this what childhood is going to look like? The room is efficient. The room is calm. The room is, in the show's view, also a kind of new horror. The children are not playing. The children are not arguing. The children are not whispering to one another. They are simply being delivered information individually through their screens. The show is not saying that this will definitely happen. The show is saying that if the current trajectory continues, this is one possible shape. And the shape is unsettling in a way that the show does not need to argue about. It simply shows you the room and lets you sit with it. If you watch the post-COVID specials back to back, they read almost as a long, quiet meditation on the costs of the internet age. The country is fine. The town is fine. The boys are fine. They are also, in small and steady ways, less than they used to be. The screens have not destroyed them. The screens have just slowly, gently narrowed the range of who they were able to become. The world they grew up in offered a slightly different set of possibilities. The world they live in now, in the show's imagined future, has been quietly streamlined by the platforms. There are fewer accidents. There are fewer surprises. There are fewer real meetings. There are fewer real arguments. There is a low hum that is always there in every room, in every car, in every screen. The hum is the internet. The hum is now the background of the entire life of everyone in the room. And the show, after years of yelling about it, has decided to simply sit and listen to it. In 2022, the show released a pair of specials about the proliferation of streaming services, both called the Streaming Wars. The premise is the kind of thing you can summarize in one sentence. There are now too many streaming services. Each one is in a small slap fight with each one of the others. Each one has bought a major piece of intellectual property. Each one is asking the consumer to subscribe. Each one is running a relentless campaign to convince the consumer that the consumer simply cannot live without it. The town, in the special, becomes a battlefield for the marketing arms of these various services. There are billboards, there are sponsored events, there are mascots that are walking through the streets. Randy Marsh, in his Tegrity Farms mode, decides to launch his own streaming service, which is, of course, simply a vehicle for selling his cannabis to a global audience. The whole town is being asked to subscribe to everything at once. What lifts the special beyond the obvious gag is the show's argument about what streaming has actually done to the texture of the audience's life. In the older world, you watched a thing, and the thing happened, and then you went and did something else. In the new world, you are always halfway through 6 things. You are halfway through a series on one service, halfway through a documentary on another, halfway through a movie on a third, halfway through a small reality show on a fourth. None of them ever quite end. The services keep them coming. The services keep producing more. The services tweak the algorithms so that the moment you finish one thing, the next thing is already playing. The show, by satirizing this, is making a point about how the entertainment industry has begun to replicate the addictive design of the social media platforms. The audience is being kept in a kind of permanent partial consumption. The audience is never quite finished. The audience is always one episode behind. The audience cannot say with confidence what they have actually watched and what they have not. There is also, in the special, a thread about water rights, which sounds unrelated but is the show's deeper argument in disguise. The streaming wars are, the special says, like fights over a finite resource. The resource is the time and attention of the audience. The services are extracting it. The services are extracting it faster than it can be replenished. The services are draining the aquifer. Randy, with his streaming service, is the worst offender. He is willing to bend any number of rules to get his customers locked into a longer subscription. He is willing to make any deal to keep the checks coming. The special, in its way, is asking the same question the show has been asking for years. What is the cost of the convenience? What is the cost of the choice? What is the cost of always having something on? The pair of specials together does not deliver a clean resolution. The streaming services do not, in the show's world, consolidate into one. The town does not, in the show's world, collectively unsubscribe. The boys do not, in the show's world, lead a movement to reclaim their attention. The specials simply end with the situation continuing, the services still competing, the audience still half watching, the town still being marketed at from every angle. The The show, true to its late period instinct, refuses to give us a victory we have not earned. We are still in the streaming era. The streaming era is still doing what it is doing. The show is simply marking the moment. The next stretch of episodes, which began in 2023, turned the camera on a much newer technology. One of them, called Joining the Panderverse, lands as a special. Another, an earlier regular episode in the same season, looks at chatbots directly through the eyes of children in school. Together, they form the show's first sustained engagement with the arrival of generative artificial intelligence in daily life. The chatbots had become real that year. The image generators had become real that year. The voice cloning had become real that year. Within a few months, ordinary people could ask a small program to write their emails, draft their essays, draw their illustrations, replace their voice actors, summarize their reading. The wider conversation had not yet caught up with what this meant. The show, characteristically, ran ahead. Joining the Panderverse uses the language of the comic book multiverse to make its point. The multiverse, in the joke of the special, is a feature of the new generative tools. You can ask the program to redo any story with any cast in any setting. You can ask the program to imagine, for instance, the same set of characters but cast with different identities and different demographics. The program will produce something plausible. The program will produce something polished. The program will produce something almost good. The show is making fun of a real practice that by 2023 had become common in the industry. The same characters were being reimagined in many different versions for many different audiences, partly through algorithmic suggestion, partly through deliberate marketing decisions, partly through the new tools that made it cheap to produce multiple variants of the same story. The special asks, with growing alarm, whether the work is still being made by people or whether it is being shuffled by the tools. The chatbot episode looks at the same wave through the eyes of schoolchildren. The boys discover that, with the help of a small program, they can ask the program to write their assignments, and the program will do it. The program writes their essays. The program writes their messages to romantic interests. The program writes their letters home. The program is, the show notes, surprisingly good at writing the kinds of things that a fourth grader is asked to write. The teachers are confused. The teachers cannot tell which essays are real and which are not. The teachers, in some scenes, start using the same program to grade the essays. The cycle becomes absurd. The program writes the work. The program grades the work. The program writes the comments about the work. The student, the teacher, and the family are all reduced to spectators in their own classroom, while the program does both ends of the conversation. The show, in this stretch, makes its own deeper joke about itself. Several scenes raise the worry that in the near future, programs may be able to generate entire television shows in the style of South Park, without anyone needing to write or animate or voice anything. The show is acknowledging the threat that the new tools pose to its own existence. The show is not pretending to be above this. The show is, in its way, saying, yes, this could replace us. Yes, this is a real concern. Yes, the program is good enough that a casual viewer might not, in the future, be able to tell the difference. The work does not give us a final answer about what to do. It simply sits with the question. It is one of the most honest moments of self-awareness the show has ever performed. The internet, which had once been a thing for the show to satirize, had finally become the thing that might replace the show. The show, having watched the internet for almost 3 decades, was now being watched back. In the winter of 2023, the show released a special that turned its attention to the children of the country who had grown up on video sharing platforms. It is called Not Suitable for Children, and it is one of the most quietly damning pieces of internet commentary in the show's late period. The premise is that one of the adults in town, in this case Randy, discovers that the video he has put online for adult viewers has been viewed millions of times by an audience he had not anticipated, which is to say, by children. The platforms had been ranking his work in feeds that were also being shown to younger viewers. The platforms had been doing this for years. The platforms had not, the special notes, been particularly careful about it. The special expands outward from there. It considers the wider category of creator who has built a fortune by producing content that is, in the best case, tolerated by parents, and in the worst case, actively harmful to the children watching it. It considers the children themselves, who in the special's reading have been raised, in part, by a stream of bright, loud videos that have shaped their attention spans, their language, their humor, and their relationships with adult authority. The special is, more or less openly, asking what the long-term consequences are going to be when an entire generation has been raised primarily by the algorithm. It does not, of course, have a final answer. Nobody does yet. We are still inside the experiment. But the special is willing to say that the experiment is happening and that nobody seems to be running it on purpose. There is a beautiful, almost weary sequence in the special where the boys, who have themselves been formed by this same media environment, watch a group of younger children and try to understand them. The younger children are speaking in the cadences of the influencers they have been watching. The younger children are making the gestures they have seen on the small phone screens. The younger children are, in the special's logic, not really children anymore in the older sense. They are something like junior influencers, performing for an invisible camera at all times, even when no camera is present. The boys, in their middle period, find this disturbing in a way they cannot quite articulate. They are, of course, themselves part of the same arc. They themselves have grown up in front of screens. But they remember a slightly older world with slightly older textures, and they are watching the next group of children move into something even thinner than what they had. The show is, in this sequence, doing something it has rarely done before. It is showing us its own characters as the last generation that still has any memory of an older way of being. The next generation does not have that memory. The next generation is starting from a different point. The special does not punish the children for any of this. It is gentle with them. It is not gentle with the platforms. It is not gentle with the creators. It is not gentle with the parents who have allowed the situation. It is asking, with growing seriousness, who is responsible for the new shape of childhood. The platforms point at the creators point at the audience. The audience is too young to point anywhere. The parents point at their own busy schedules. The advertisers point at the consumer. The consumer points at the platform. The circle is closed. Nobody is at fault. The result is the small, bright screen in the small hand of the small child, glowing all afternoon, teaching them whatever it teaches them for hours and hours, without anyone in the room being quite willing to claim authorship. That image is, in many ways, the final image of this entire essay. South Park began in 1997 as a show about a small town in Colorado in which the children went to school, played outside, ate at the kitchen table, and watched a small television in the corner of the living room. The internet in that first season was barely in the room. By the late 2020s, in the show's recent specials, the small town has become a place in which almost every interaction is mediated by a screen. Almost every conversation is interrupted by a notification. Almost every gathering is filmed for some kind of upload. Almost every relationship is conducted, in part, through an app. The show has been watching that change the entire time. The show has been logging it year by year, episode by episode, special by special. There is, in television history, almost no other long-running show that has documented the transformation of the country by the internet at this level of detail. The show has been a kind of slow camera holding steady on a small town as the network grew up around it. And the show's deeper argument, when you assemble all the episodes together, is not the obvious one. The obvious one would be that the internet is bad and that we should turn it off. The show, characteristically, does not actually believe that. The show grants the internet's gifts. The show grants that the connection is real. The show grants that the convenience is real. The show grants that the access to knowledge, the access to community, the access to art, the access to other minds is all real. The show is not a Luddite show. The show is not asking us to go back. The show is asking us to notice the cost. The show is asking us to notice the posture. The show is asking us to notice the look. The show is asking us to notice the child in the chair, the family at the dinner table with all 5 phones out, the troll in the basement, the influencer in the back garden, the warehouse worker on the concrete floor, the chef in the kitchen with the small monitor showing the dining room, the lonely user in the conspiracy thread, the parent in the kitchen using the box, the friend with the box on her face, and the small face of the next child who will be raised, in part by an algorithm. The show is saying, look at all of this. We did not vote for any of it. We just clicked yes. If there is a final thesis to the show's long argument with the internet, it is something like this. The screen is not a thief. The screen is not a villain. The screen is something we built and we let into the room and we agreed to live with. and we then forgot that we had agreed to anything at all. The screen is, like all human inventions, a thing whose consequences are downstream of the choices of the humans who made it and the humans who use it. The show is not asking us to blame the screen. The show is asking us to remember that we were the ones who put it there. The show is asking us to remember that we can, in small ways, still decide what to do with it. The show is asking us to remember that the look between two people in a room is still possible, and is still free, and is still ours to choose. The show has, in its quiet way, been making this argument for almost 3 decades. It made the argument through a Warcraft player wasting away in a chair. It made the argument through a family fleeing across a desert toward a single working router. It made the argument through a boy fused to a piece of consumer hardware. It made the argument through a town overrun by walking advertisements. It made the argument through a member berry whispering nostalgia into the kitchen. It made the argument through a father typing cruelty into a keyboard. It made the argument through a girl trying to leave a manipulative boy. It made the argument through a phone in the hand of a frightened child. It made the argument through a box on the face of a tired adult. It made the argument through a streaming service designed to never let you finish. It made the argument through a program that could write the essay and grade the essay at the same time. It made the argument through a small girl performing for an invisible audience all afternoon. The argument is the same argument. The argument is that we are different now, and the change crept up on us, and we owe it to ourselves to keep looking at it. So that is the long version of what South Park has been doing with the internet. Episode by episode, year by year, season by season, special by special. It has been writing a kind of slow biography of how we became the people we now are. Some of the episodes have been funny, some of them have been savage, some of them have been tender, some of them have aged badly. Some of them have aged uncomfortably well. None of them have been silent. The show has, for almost 30 years, refused to leave the room. The screens have grown brighter, the platforms have grown larger, the algorithms have grown smarter, the children have grown thinner around the edges of the chair, and the show has kept the camera on all of it. It is one of the longest acts of sustained cultural observation that American television has ever produced about a single subject. And the subject is the same as the subject of your evening. It is the small, bright thing in your hand. It is the long, quiet hum behind your ear. It is the patient, generous, dangerous, beautiful, exhausting thing that we built and that now lives with us, and that we are still, all of us, figuring out how to share a room with. If you found yourself drifting somewhere in the middle of this, that is exactly what we hoped. We wanted this to be a long, quiet sit with a show that has been a quiet sit with the rest of us for a long time. Papertown is here to keep you company through nights like this, with long, calm essays about the things you love, paced for the hour when your eyes start to close. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.